Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a time of giants, but not with roaring chaos or clashing claws. No, we'll tread slowly, softly, through ancient forests and forgotten plains in search of the peaceful shadows left behind by the dinosaurs. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the rise and fall of dinosaurs together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Let's start not with a roar, but with stillness. Imagine a rocky desert somewhere in Montana or a windswept plateau in Argentina. A scientist kneels in the dirt, brushing away grains of sand from something almost invisible at first. A curved ridge, a line of fossilized vertebrae, the hint of a toe claw. Bones that haven't seen sunlight in over 65 million years, now emerging like old memories surfacing from the subconscious of the Earth. This isn't just science, it's a kind of listening, a kind of remembering. Positions of the language of deep time, not loud, not even clear most of the time, but slow and patient. Every fossil is a paused moment, evidence that something once lived, walked, breathed, perhaps even parented, hunted, or slept beneath the same stars we see today. You can hold one in your hand and feel the weight of an entire world that no longer exists. Dinosaurs have a way of living in two places at once. They are at once the most ancient and the most modern of beings. We see them in movies, in museum halls, in children's picture books. They stomp through our imaginations with scaly majesty or soft feathers, sometimes monstrous, sometimes oddly graceful. But underneath the stories we've layered onto them is something quiet, something deeply real. Disillusioned, we won't sprint through their reign. We'll walk gently across the eras they inhabited. We'll trace their rise from tiny, fleet-footed survivors to the titans of the Jurassic and the wonders of the Cretaceous. We'll observe not just how they died, but how magnificently they lived. The story of the dinosaurs is not just one of extinction, it's also about resilience, adaptation, complexity, and mystery. It's about a world shaped by shifting continents, roaring volcanoes, blooming plants, and cooling oceans. It's about creatures who flourished, not for 100 years or 1,000, but for over 150 million. That's so long your brain might need a moment to stretch around the number. So here's a softer comparison. If all of Earth's history were compressed into a single 24-hour day, the dinosaurs would arrive around 10:56 p.m, and they'd roam the planet for nearly an hour, until just before midnight. Humans? We'd appear in the last few seconds, barely enough time to blink. Let that sink in like a distant footstep on soft soil. We are the newcomers here. Yet the past still lingers, in birdsong, in fossilized tea, in the sway of a heron's neck as it stalks the edge of a pond. So let's settle in. Let's drift backward. Not in haste, but in reverence. The Earth remembers everything. Tonight, we will listen. Close your eyes for a moment if you'd like. Picture the curve of a massive footprint, pressed deep into what is now hard rock but was once soft mud, beside a Cretaceous lake. The air was warmer then. Ferns waved in the breeze. Dragonflies the size of dinner plates buzzed above. And something enormous. Something with scales or feathers or both passed silently through that landscape, unaware that it would leave behind a mark that would outlive it by millions upon millions of years. That is the strange poetry of paleontology. A kind of accidental memory preserved in stone. And that's the beautiful contradiction of dinosaurs. They feel like myths, but they are not. They feel too strange to be real, too big, too fantastical, too unlike anything walking the earth today. But they were real. Not just museum models or CGI shadows. They lived. They nested. They hunted. They migrated with the seasons and left their bones beneath shifting rivers and volcanic ash waiting to be found. You've likely seen a towering Tyrannosaurus rex in a museum. But did you know that every fossil we display is a kind of puzzle? Paleontologists rarely find a complete skeleton. They piece together fragments, ribs, jaws, a few claws, sometimes teeth, and then fill in the missing parts with careful inference. In that way, every dinosaur we see is a combination of stone and science, and a little imagination. Pioneered what's perhaps most gentle, most curious, is that even the names we give them often hold a kind of sleepy charm. Apatosaurus, deceptive lizard. Triceratops, three-horned face. Diplodocus, double beam. Even Tyrannosaurus rex, for all its ferocity, means simply tyrant lizard king. A bit dramatic perhaps, but it does roll off the tongue nicely. These names don't just invitations. Doorways into other epochs. Think of the first time someone ever discovered a fossilized claw. They likely didn't say, "Ah, yes, a Cretaceous predator." They might have thought it was a dragon's talon, or the finger of a buried god. Before science had explanations, the Earth's old bones inspired stories. Ancient Chinese texts describe dragon bones dug from hillsides, mystical, potent, ground into medicine. In Europe, strange teeth and skulls were sometimes said to belong to giants, or beasts from forgotten battles, priesthood. It wasn't until the 1800s that the word dinosaur was even coined. It means terrible lizard, though that term is misleading. Dinosaurs weren't actually lizards. And not all were terrible. Some were no bigger than chickens. Some were covered in downy feathers. Some might have sung, in soft, bird-like croaks, to their mates or their young. And now, we know that birds are dinosaurs. Just a surviving branch of the great family tree has not vanished entirely. It has simply grown smaller, lighter, more familiar. The ancient still flutters in the trees. So tonight, as we begin this slow walk through the Mesozoic, remember, this is not a monster story. It is not about domination or destruction. It's about evolution, time, fragility, survival, the rise of a lineage and its quiet departure, leaving behind bones, feathers, and just enough wonder to keep us listening. We'll move next into the dawn of dinosaurs, into the days before the giants came, into a world scorched and emptied by extinction, where the stage was reset and nature quietly rehearsed a new performance. But not just yet. There's no need to rush. The past isn't going anywhere. Before we meet the first dinosaurs, we must visit the world that came before them, a world lost not just to time, but to silence. The Permian period, which ended over 250 million years ago, was the stage upon which Earth's Great Reset was written. It's a name that doesn't stir much drama, not like Jurassic or Cretaceous, but in truth, the Permian was the most consequential chapter you may have never heard of. Let's go back. We're not scattered then as they are now. They were fused into a single vast landmass, Pangaea, a supercontinent shaped like a cracked and weathered puzzle piece, ringed by the enormous Panthalassic Ocean. The Earth's climate was extreme. Deserts stretched across the interior like parchment, while polar regions saw bitter cold. But even here, life adapted. Forests filled with towering seed ferns, primitive conifers, and bizarre plants that have no living relatives today. Insects flourished too, giant dragonflies, beetles and scorpions, and among them moved strange creatures with even stranger names. Dimetrodon, with its great sail of bone and skin arching above its spine. Edaphosaurus, with stumpy limbs and a wide herbivorous jaw. These weren't dinosaurs, not yet. They were part of a lineage known as synapsids, more closely related to mammals than to reptiles. In a way, they were our ancestors' great uncles. The Permian world was ancient, diverse, and remarkably successful. For millions of years, life had been slowly innovating. Hard shells, lungs, jaws, limbs, teeth, an arms race of anatomy, and then something happened. Migrated. Quiet. Something devastating. undermined 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced what scientists now call the Great Dying, the largest mass extinction event in our planet's history, larger even than the one that would later end the age of dinosaurs. During this catastrophe, over 90% of all marine species and around 70% of land species vanished. Plunge, imagine that. A silence so complete it erased almost every melody from Earth's living symphony. Unleashed, what caused this? The answer is complex and still unfolding, but one strong suspect is volcanism, specifically the Siberian Traps, an immense region of ancient lava flows in what is now Russia. For nearly 1 million years, volcanoes erupted there in cycles, releasing staggering amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur gases into the atmosphere. The skies dimmed, the oceans acidified, global temperatures soared then fell, oxygen levels in the water dropped so low that vast stretches of sea became toxic. Forests withered, food chains unraveled, and life which had been flourishing suddenly collapsed. Bathrooms, there is something humbling in that, not in a fearful way, but in a reflective one. The Earth itself, our steady, grounding home, can shift in ways too large for any single creature to survive, and yet life, somehow, endures. Blinked, because not everything died. A few lineages held on, scrappy, obscure, unremarkable at the time. Among them were the archosaurs, a group of reptiles that would later give rise to crocodiles, pterosaurs, and, of course, the dinosaurs. The Permian left behind more than silence. It left behind possibility, minimized. To forest burns, the soil beneath remains, and something always sprouts from ash. That's where we'll go next, into the recovery, into the Triassic dawn, where from a quiet and fractured Earth, new forms began to rise. Imagine standing on a shoreline, but not one you'd recognize. The sun glows dimly through a hazy sky. The waves that reach the rocks seem sluggish, almost heavy. There's no birdsong, no buzzing insects. The trees are twisted, blackened, and beneath the surface of the water, the reefs are gone. The fish are gone. The world is eerily still. This is not science fiction. It's Earth, 252 million years ago, shortly after the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the most devastating biological crisis in our planet's history, a moment in time when life nearly stopped. It's hard to truly grasp the scale of the event. More than 90% of marine species wiped out. Coral reefs, once vibrant, vanished entirely. On land, vast forests collapsed. Insects, one of the most resilient groups in Earth's history, experienced their only known mass extinction. Reptiles, amphibians, synapsids, entire branches of the evolutionary tree, shriveled. It took life over 10 million years to recover in any meaningful way. But how did it happen? How does a planet teeming with life become so quiet? One leading explanation centers on a massive outpouring of volcanic activity in a region we now call the Siberian Traps. These weren't your average lava-spewing cones. They were flood basalts, enormous sheets of lava, erupting again and again over hundreds of thousands of years, covering over 2 million square kilometers. That's about the size of Western Europe. With each eruption came greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and sulfur dioxide, pumping into the sky, trapping heat, warming the oceans, and destabilizing ecosystems. Oxygen levels in the oceans dropped. Acidification killed off shelled creatures. Methane trapped even more heat in a runaway feedback loop. There's even evidence that the ocean turned sulfidic, filled with toxic hydrogen sulfide gas that poisoned life in the shallows. Just that global temperatures rose by 8 to 10 degrees Celsius in relatively short geological time. In human terms, imagine summer never ending and the air growing too thick to breathe. Embraces. The world did not end. Even in the darkest moments, life clung to the edges. Some fish survived, some insects made it, and on land, a small group of upright reptiles with long limbs and a slightly elevated stance began to emerge into the gaps left by extinction. They were not impressive at first. Many were the size of house cats, but these were the archosaurs, the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and the stars of our story, dinosaurs. Mass extinctions, for all their devastation, are strange turning points. They are terrible, yes, but they also clear the board. They make room for experiments, for strangeness, for something new. Springfield that followed the Great Dying was different, scarred, quieter, but not empty. From those fragile survivors would come the next great flourishing. So much of life's story is written in cycles: growth, collapse, renewal. It's tempting to think of evolution as a ladder, but it's more like a winding path, and sometimes the path goes dark before it continues. Tonight we walk alongside those early survivors, creatures without names, without grandeur, just persistence. In the next session, we'll meet the first true ancestors of the dinosaurs, walking quietly into the opening act of the Triassic. The silence is lifting. The Earth is ready to dream again. The Earth had quieted. The Permian was gone, and with it the ancient forests, the dragonflies with wings like daggers, and most of the creatures who had called that world home. But from the hush came movement. Small at first, light-footed, alert. These were not giants. Not yet. But in the early Triassic, they were the first to step into the sunlit gaps that extinction had left behind. Among these survivors was a lineage of reptiles with something different. They stood a little taller on their limbs. They moved with an upright gait, not sprawling like lizards or crocodiles. Their bodies were more streamlined, more efficient, and over time, more varied. These were the archosaurs, meaning ruling reptiles. And indeed, they would come to rule. Archosaurs split into two great branches. One would give us crocodiles and their ancient cousins, semi-aquatic, armoured, thick-bodied. The other would rise upward, both literally and evolutionarily, into two fantastical families. The pterosaurs, who would one day take to the skies, and the dinosaurs, who would come to roam the land in forms both thunderous and delicate. Modest. Least known dinosaur relatives was Asilosaurus, a small, dog-sized herbivore that lived about 245 million years ago. It wasn't technically a dinosaur, but it shared many traits that would become hallmarks: upright legs, rapid growth, and a lightly built skeleton. It likely moved quickly, perhaps in bursts, weaving through low scrub and catching plants between its beak-like jaws. Punished, a little later came creatures like Nyasasaurus, possibly the earliest true dinosaur, and Herrerasaurus, a sleek predator about the size of a wolf, with sharp claws and a mouth full of serrated teeth. They weren't apex predators yet, not even close, but they were gaining ground. What made them special? It wasn't just size. In fact, the earliest dinosaurs were quite small. It wasn't just strength either. It was efficiency. Upright legs meant better energy use, long-distance travel without tiring. Hollow bones meant less weight. Rapid growth meant faster maturation, quicker reproduction. They were organisms tuned for change, and change was what the world had in abundance. The Triassic Earth was restless. The supercontinent Pangaea stretched from pole to pole, its interior parched and dry, its edges ringed with forests and seasonal rains. Volcanoes rumbled often, earthquakes rearranged the map. Life, if it wanted to survive, had to adapt quickly. Dinosaurs, it turned out, were very good at that. They didn't explode into dominance overnight. For millions of years they coexisted with other reptilian groups, some of which, like the Rauisuchians and phytosaurs, were far more fearsome at the time. But the dinosaurs were biding their time, testing niches, evolving quietly. Of them as a clever understudy, learning the role before yet another extinction event. Less cataclysmic than the Permian, but still deeply transformative, it was the dinosaurs who were ready. They would step forward into the Jurassic not just as survivors, but as rulers. But that's still ahead of us. For now, we're in a world of early innovation, of slender footprints in hot volcanic soil, of swift, curious creatures darting between ferns. The stage is set, the curtain is rising. The age of dinosaurs is about to begin. Let's step into a late Triassic forest. The light is dappled, filtering down through fern fronds and primitive conifer branches. The air smells damp, rich with decay and growth. A stream winds between stones smoothed by ages of rain, and darting along the forest floor is something quick, alert and small. Eoraptor. Just over a metre long with hollow bones and a slender tail for balance, Eoraptor was one of the earliest true dinosaurs. It lived about 231 million years ago in what is now Argentina. It wouldn't have looked particularly fearsome, more like a wiry, featherless bird with teeth, but in many ways it carried the blueprint for what was to come. It is bipedal, it walked on two legs, and had grasping hands, likely used for snatching insects, small vertebrates, and perhaps the occasional juicy plant. Its teeth were curved and lightly serrated, suggesting it was omnivorous. Not a specialist, but a generalist, a trait that often favours survival when the world is uncertain. And the Triassic was very uncertain. Projecta's supercontinent Pangaea meant that climates were extreme. Interiors were arid, seasons could be brutal. There were droughts, floods, firestorms. Plants evolved tough leaves and spiny defences. In this challenging world, being small, fast and adaptable was a winning formula. Eoraptor belonged to a group we now call the Sauricians, or lizard-hipped dinosaurs, a lineage that would eventually give rise to both the giant sauropods and the carnivorous theropods, including Tyrannosaurus rex, and through a long, winding road, modern birds. It's humbling, isn't it, to trace the arc of evolution from a nimble little creature like Eoraptor to a nightingale in spring. The songbird on a wire is a distant echo of something that once tiptoed through ancient undergrowth. Imprisoned, but Eoraptor wasn't alone. Triassic hosted an increasing diversity of early dinosaurs, including Herrerasaurus, a slightly larger predator with a stronger bite and a more specialised carnivorous diet. There was Coelophysis, one of the earliest theropods, which may have lived in groups, possibly even hunted in coordinated flocks. Their fossils have been found in bone beds, whole groups buried together, possibly by flash floods or volcanic ash. A haunting kind of preservation, like a time capsule opened too late for questions. These early dinosaurs weren't dominant yet. They were quick-footed outsiders living in the margins, outcompeting some rivals but still wary of the larger predators around them. They lived among strange armoured creatures, beaked reptiles and massive amphibians. The world wasn't yet theirs. Forging, what they had was momentum. Abolish weather being built for motion, lightweight skeletons, strong hind limbs, efficient lungs that may have resembled the flow-through system birds still use today. They were not just survivors, they were innovators. Innovation in biology is like a gentle tide. It may not look like much at first, but over time, it shapes continents. As the Triassic drew toward its end, the world began to shift once more. Sea levels rose, volcanoes flared, ecosystems cracked under the pressure. And once again, extinction opened a door. This time, the dinosaurs walked through it. They had been rehearsing long enough. The Jurassic was waiting, and so were the forests, the floodplains, and the skies that would one day hold wings. But for now, let's sit with Eoraptor a moment longer. Watch it dart between fallen logs. Let the forest hum in the background. The giants are coming, yes, but first came this light-footed traveller, a quiet ancestor, stepping into the sun. Let's rise above the forest now, up and up until the ground falls away and the shape of the world begins to change beneath us. This is the late Triassic, and if we could hover quietly in the sky, we'd see a single enormous landmass stretching across the globe. One continent, one supercontinent, Pangaea. Its name means all Earth, and it was as dramatic as it sounds. Instead of the familiar patchwork of continents we know today, Pangaea was a hulking expanse of land surrounded by the vast, solitary Panthalassic Ocean. Picture all the continents we recognise, Africa, Asia, the Americas, pressed into a single continent like a great jigsaw puzzle before it breaks apart. Compelled, but such unity came at a cost. Pangaea's interior was dry, harsh and hot. Without the buffering influence of surrounding seas, inland regions swung wildly between seasons. Scorching summers and freezing winters. Monsoons hammered the coasts. Winds howled through mountain ranges. Volcanoes dotted the landscape, venting heat and reshaping terrain. And beneath all of this, the tectonic plates were restless. The Earth's crust is never still. It's made of massive plates that drift atop the semi-fluid mantle, sometimes colliding, sometimes tearing apart. Over millions of years, these slow motions shift the face of the planet. The breakup of Pangaea was just beginning in the Triassic, creating rift valleys and shallow inland seas. These changes, gradual though they were, would eventually carve the world into the continents we know today. Position, even then, the environment shaped everything. Because where there is land, there is weather. And where there is weather, there is life, adapting, struggling, changing. The early dinosaurs didn't just evolve in isolation. They were responding to the world around them, to rising mountains, to drying basins, to forests that burned and regrew, shifting from conifer dominance to ginkgos, cycads and ferns. Every step they took was shaped by the rhythm of the planet beneath their feet. Kais, the atmosphere itself was transforming. Bond dioxide levels in the Triassic were high, likely much higher than today. That meant a warmer global climate, even without industrial pollution. These natural greenhouse gases kept polar regions ice-free and fueled fast plant growth in the humid zones. But they also brought instability, sudden warming events, droughts, shifting rainfall patterns. For small animals, this could be a disaster. For adaptable ones, it was opportunity. Buffalo, with their upright stance, lightweight bones, and efficient movement, could move across vast distances in search of food and water. They could explore. They could expand. And they did. Fossils of early dinosaurs have been found on every continent, including Antarctica. Proof that these tell a story. Some species laid soft-shelled eggs, others hard. Some buried them, some arranged them in open nests. This flexibility, across species, across landscapes, allowed them to thrive not just as wanderers, but as settlers. The Earth was changing, and the dinosaurs were keeping pace. There's something steadying about that idea, that even as the continents pulled apart and the air thickened with heat, life found a way to adjust, to continue, to explore. Tonight we drift across that ancient world, following not just footprints in the mud but the slow motion of the planet itself. The next time you look at a world map, remember, it wasn't always like this. And it won't always be like this. Ubiquitous, but life moves with the land, and so did the dinosaurs. Not all reptiles in the Triassic were destined for greatness. In fact, for much of that age, the dinosaurs were far from dominant. They were small, quick, and relatively rare compared to some of the truly fearsome creatures they lived alongside. Imagine walking through a floodplain after a seasonal storm. The ground is muddy, the vegetation thick. In the distance, a large animal lumbers into view. Not a dinosaur, but a Rauisuchian, one of the top predators of the time. It's built like a crocodile but with longer limbs held under its body, and it towers over the early dinosaurs nearby. Sharp teeth, a heavy skull, and powerful legs, it was a formidable hunter. Or, picture a riverbank lined with squat, toothy phytosaurs. Crocodile-like reptiles that weren't actually crocodiles at all. With nostrils on their heads instead of the ends of their snouts, they waited in murky water for prey to stray too close. These creatures were survivors of the Permian extinction, and they were still thriving, still ruling. Against them, dinosaurs might have looked like background characters, small, lightweight, low on the food chain. So why did they become the rulers of the Mesozoic? It wasn't brute strength, it was something subtler, something evolutionary, a kind of quiet cleverness built into their bones. First there was their posture. Dinosaurs walked with their legs directly beneath their bodies, not sprawled out to the sides like many other reptiles. This allowed them to move more efficiently, using less energy to cover long distances and freeing up their hands for grasping, balancing or manipulating food. Then there was their respiratory system. Fossil evidence suggests that some early dinosaurs may have had air sacs like modern birds, allowing for a unidirectional flow of air through the lungs. This is far more efficient than the in and out breathing we humans use. In a hot, low oxygen world, that kind of lung efficiency could make all the difference. They also grew quickly. Bone studies show rapid growth rates, more similar to birds and mammals than to reptiles. In a world of constant environmental stress, growing fast meant reaching adulthood and reproduction before drought, predators, or famine could cut life short. In short, dinosaurs were built for volatility, and the Triassic world was nothing if not volatile. Earthquakes, eruptions, fires, floods, all regular features of the landscape. Ecosystems shifted rapidly, favouring creatures that could adapt, travel, recover. Dinosaurs didn't overpower their rivals overnight, they outlasted them. Accompanying when the end of the Triassic came, another extinction, caused by massive volcanic eruptions linked to the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. It was the large, specialised reptiles, like the Rauisuchians and phytosaurs, that vanished. Their time had passed. Promislu, they stepped forward, largely unscathed. What had once been small survivors in the shadows now had the entire stage to themselves. This wasn't a victory with fanfare. It was the quiet kind, the kind you don't notice until years later, when the landscape looks completely different and you wonder how it happened. That's evolution's favourite move. Not the loud arrival, but the gentle, persistent. Tonight we sit with those smaller reptiles, not yet giants, not yet legends, watching as the world reshapes itself around them. The sun is setting on the Triassic, and the dinosaurs are waiting in the wings. They are ready. What makes a dinosaur a dinosaur? It's a question that might seem simple, but like many things in deep time, the answer requires a gentle pause. Because not every large reptile from the ancient past was a dinosaur. In fact, many of the animals often lumped together with dinosaurs, like the flying pterosaurs or the sea-dwelling plesiosaurs, weren't dinosaurs at all. To be a true dinosaur, you had to be part of a very specific club, one with a surprisingly elegant set of design principles. Let's start with the hips. The humble hip bone, one of the most important clues paleontologists use to sort out who belonged to the dinosaur family and who was just visiting. All dinosaurs shared a particular arrangement of their pelvic bones that allowed for an upright stance. Their legs were positioned directly beneath their bodies, like the columns of a building, efficient, stable, and strong. This was a big deal. It allowed them to walk and run with less energy, carry their weight more evenly, and hold up bodies that, in some cases, would grow to weigh dozens of tons. Trim this with animals like lizards or crocodiles whose limbs splay out to the sides. It's the difference between a sprinter running on two legs and a swimmer crawling on all fours. One hugs the ground, the other strides above it. Flaming there was the skull, another diagnostic hallmark of dinosaur design. Many early dinosaurs had openings in their skulls called antorbital fenestrae, a fancy term for windows in the bone in front of the eye sockets. These lightened the skull, made room for strong jaw muscles, and helped keep the animal's head both powerful and lightweight. And speaking of lightness, many dinosaurs had hollow bones. Not fragile, but smart. Strong enough to support the animal's weight, but airy enough to reduce the burden of movement. Birds inherited this feature. It's part of what lets them fly today. But long before birds were even a dream, hollow bones were letting dinosaurs walk farther, run faster, and grow bigger without being slowed down by their own frames. Submerged inside their bodies, there was likely another advantage, a bird-like respiratory system. While we humans breathe in and then breathe out, like filling and emptying a balloon, birds use a system of air sacs that keeps air moving continuously in one direction through their lungs. It's more efficient, especially in warm or oxygen-poor environments. There's fossil evidence that some dinosaurs shared this adaptation. They weren't just breathing, they were breathing smarter. Taken together, these features created creatures that weren't just giant lizards. They were something else, something new. Light-boned but strong, upright but balanced, warm-blooded, or at least warmish, moving through their world with a combination of grace and power that no other group had quite managed before. Some were built for speed, like the early theropods with long legs and stiff tails. Some were built for strength, like the stocky herbivores that would follow in the Jurassic, but all of them at their core shared this elegant framework, an evolutionary body plan that was adaptable, expandable, and remarkably successful. It's easy to think of dinosaurs only in terms of size. The biggest, the tallest, the fiercest, but sometimes what made them thrive wasn't their grandeur, it was their design. Like the blueprint of a cathedral or the layout of a perfect melody, it wasn't about noise, it was about balance, proportion, efficiency. Tonight, as we step closer to the age of giants, remember that it all began with posture, bones, breath, and time. Granite was already written. Now, evolution was ready to build something spectacular. There's something quietly fascinating about warmth, the kind that comes from within. You know it when you hold a cup of tea between your palms, or when a cat curls up beside you and radiates gentle heat. That steady hum of life, self-sustained, not borrowed from the sun, but brewed from the body. For many years, dinosaurs were thought to be cold-blooded like modern reptiles, slow, sluggish, reliant on the sun to get moving in the morning. It was an image popularized by early paleontologists and reinforced by paintings of lumbering, tail-dragging brutes, basking in swamps too heavy and too dull to do much else. That image has quietly crumbled. Merged as more fossils emerged and as paleontology shifted from shovels to scans, a new portrait of dinosaurs began to form, not cold, not slow, not basking in sunlight for heat, but rather burning a little fire inside, warm-blooded, active, fast-growing and always on the move. The technical term for this internal warmth is endothermy, a metabolism powered by the body's own heat engine, like in mammals and birds. Its opposite is ectothermy, where heat is gathered from the environment, as in lizards and snakes. But here's the twist: evolution isn't binary. It rarely offers a simple yes or no. Instead, it gives us gradients, hybrids, transitional states. And dinosaurs seem to have existed somewhere in between. Some species, especially the small, agile predators, show signs of rapid growth, evident in the structure of their bones. When scientists slice through fossilized femurs or ribs, they find growth rings, like the ones in trees. In cold-blooded animals, those rings tend to show long pauses, winters of stasis. But in many dinosaurs, the rings are closer together, suggesting consistent, year-round growth. They grew fast, just like birds, just like mammals. Some had insulation, feathers or feather-like filaments, which would have helped trap body heat. That alone suggests they were generating heat to begin with. Why insulate an engine that's never warm? Others had large hearts and strong lungs, inferred from bone structure and chest cavity size, systems that make sense only if you're supporting a high-energy lifestyle. And then there's locomotion. Dinosaurs weren't just standing, they were striding, moving purposefully, covering ground, some likely migrating across continents. That kind of effort requires more than a sunbath. It demands stamina, and stamina needs fuel, metabolic energy that doesn't switch off when the sun goes down. But perhaps the strongest piece of the puzzle is this: birds. Our feathered companions are not just related to dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, living ones. Every sparrow, every parrot, every sleepy chicken is a direct descendant of theropods like Velociraptor and Deinonychus, and birds are thoroughly, unquestionably warm-blooded. Even a further dinosaurs that were stanglist. The even of these designer once time to called birds was ilated, and its birds and self live this properly's vira moment, which results they are believes and the state of the comfort, and like endothermy likely evolved gradually, and it's likely that many dinosaurs lived somewhere on the spectrum, some cooler, some warmer, depending on their size, diet, environment, and lifestyle. So were dinosaurs warm-blooded? Preenville, not all, but many, almost certainly yes. Not cold-blooded monsters, but warm-bodied animals with beating hearts and lungs that pumped oxygen into active limbs. They weren't sunbathers, they were survivors, movers, explorers. That's something to remember next time you see a bird fluff its feathers on a winter morning. Somewhere in its lineage is a dinosaur that did the same, sheltering its heat against a chill, living in a world that was rarely gentle. Even in prehistory, warmth was a kind of resilience. As the Triassic era faded and the Jurassic quietly took its place, something beautiful began to happen. Not all at once, but like spring arriving in slow motion. The dinosaurs, once few and modest, began to diversify. It was as if the world had taken a deep breath after the chaos of the previous extinctions, and in that breath, evolution began to paint with broader strokes. Trembling on the plains and along the riverbanks, dinosaurs of all shapes and sizes began to emerge. Some sharpened their claws, others thickened their skin. Some grew taller, others bulked up. Some shrank and learned to run. Each niche, the predator, the grazer, the speedster, the tank, began to fill. This was the beginning of what paleontologists call an adaptive radiation, a period when a single group of organisms suddenly expands into many different forms to exploit the resources of a newly available world. With many of their reptilian competitors gone, after the end Triassic extinction, the dinosaurs had space to experiment. Punished. So they did. Killing the predator side, we see creatures like Dilophosaurus, a sleek, double-crested hunter that prowled the Jurassic forests. Though its frilled venom-spitting image in popular films is pure fiction, the real animal was no less intriguing. Long-legged and agile, it may have hunted in pairs, using speed and sharp teeth to bring down prey. Foreground, but not all dinosaurs were chasing food. Some were being chased, and adapting to avoid it. In open habitats, small ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs, began to appear. These included early forms of creatures that would eventually become the duck-billed hadrosaurs, the horned ceratopsians, and the armoured ankylosaurs. Many were small, herbivorous, and quick, with stiff tails for balance and sharp eyes for spotting danger. Signs of social behaviour: herding. Like wildebeest or zebras today, these dinosaurs may have lived in groups, gaining protection in numbers. Fossil sites containing dozens of individuals, including juveniles and adults, suggest that they may have moved together, fed together, and perhaps even nested in communal grounds. Imagine that for a moment: a herd of small, upright dinosaurs moving in synchronized motion across a sun-dappled clearing. Heads low, tails high, listening for the sound of something larger in the trees. This was not a static world. It was full of motion, tension, and balance, a living dance of prey and predator, of growth and adaptation. We also see the rise of sauropodomorphs, early ancestors of the long-necked giants that would later dominate the Jurassic. Still modest in size, they were already stretching upward, experimenting with neck length, diet, and posture. The idea of being tall, to reach higher vegetation, to spot danger, was taking root. Windshield in every direction, life was expanding outward. Not necessarily in loud, flashy ways, but steadily. The dinosaurs were exploring what they could be. Some grew feathers, at first for warmth or display. Others developed elaborate crests or tail fans. Some thickened their skulls into domes. Some grew thumbs that could spike. Others flattened theirs into paddles. It was a biological workshop, and the tools were endlessly inventive. And what's so quietly lovely about this phase in dinosaur history is how much of it was driven not by supremacy, but by coexistence. Saws weren't conquering the world, they were fitting into it, shaping themselves to match the patterns of wind, light, and leaf. Evolution was not just about being the strongest, it was about being ready, being flexible, being just different enough. Tonight, we pause here, in the opening chapters of the Jurassic. We stand beneath the branches of a tall ginkgo tree and watch the world fill up again, not with roar or thunder, but with movement. And in that movement, life was beginning to bloom. Let's take a breath here, before we step into the towering world of the Jurassic giants. Because there's something about the Triassic dawn that deserves a moment of stillness. Quiet morning, millions of years ago. The light has not yet risen above the treetops. Dew clings to the ferns, the air is cooler than it will be at midday, carrying the scent of wet earth, old bark, and distant ash from last week's volcanic breath. You're not a scientist here, you're not even a person, you're just present, watching. From the undergrowth, a small creature steps lightly onto a sun-warmed rock. It's a feathered theropod, maybe a Chelophysis or something similar, no bigger than a border collie. It blinks, it stretches, it turns its head sharply to listen to something invisible to your ears. Behind it, a chorus of insects begins, hesitant at first, then bolder. They just enough to whisper, and for a few slow minutes time has no meaning. This world of children's books and museum exhibits, it's not teeth and roars and chase scenes. It's the reality that existed before all that. A living, breathing world, warm with breath, cool with shade, alive with texture. Yet, it's gone. Makes it precious. The Triassic is often overlooked. It's the quiet prologue, the necessary background, but without it, there is no crescendo. No sauropods, no T-Rex, no birds in your backyard. The Triassic is where the shapes began, where evolution dipped its brush into the first colours and sketched what dinosaurs might become. And Tulbawanathan, there's a certain kind of beauty in beginnings. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're full of possibility. The future has not yet declared itself. The paths have not yet narrowed. Life is still dreaming. And in that dream, the dinosaurs were just waking up. Soakley. The here in this early morning light, all of that lies ahead. What we see now is balance. Kindergarten warm watching from the brush. Herds of herbivores rustling in the distance. Forests thick with seed ferns and cycads. Pterosaurs circling above the cliffs, riding thermals that have not yet changed. The Earth is older than we can imagine, and yet at this moment it feels almost new. It's strange to think that such a time could be forgotten, that an entire chapter of life could exist, thrive, flourish, and then disappear, leaving only stone and silence. But that's what the Earth does. It remembers in fossils, in layers, in chemistry and carbon and cracks in the ground. And we, fragile, curious, late-arriving humans, read those remnants like bedtime stories written in bone. We trace the gentle arc of time with our fingers and ask softly, what was it like? You know a little more. Just a waiting room before the Jurassic. It was a world of its own, with its own colours, its own warmth, its own music. And in that music, the dinosaurs found their rhythm. Next, we'll step into their golden age, the Jurassic. A time when those rhythms became thunder, when the gentle sketches became masterpieces, when the world tilted just right, and life rose tall to meet the sky. But not yet. For now, let the sun rise slowly over this Triassic morning. Let the echoes fade. Let the fern leaves drip. Let the silence stretch. Gombating. Things sacred in the beginning. Jurassic period begins not with a bang but with a deep breath. A hush after the storm of extinction. The Triassic has ended, taking with it the old world order. Many of the early reptiles that once ruled the land have vanished, and the world is warm, damp, and full of opportunity. It is morning again for life. And the dinosaurs awaken. They don't suddenly grow enormous overnight. No creature does. Evolution doesn't leap, it meanders. But something shifts in the Jurassic. The survivors of the Triassic begin to stretch taller, grow heavier, move farther. New species emerge, not just to fill niches but to reshape them. This is when the modest players of the past begin their slow transformation into giants. The continents are still joined, though beginning to fracture. Shallow seas flood the lowlands. Warm, humid climates stretch across what is now North America, Europe, and Asia. Forests of conifers, ginkgos, and cycads grow dense and tall, offering abundant food to those who can reach it. Dinosaurs begin to grow longer necks. The early sauropodomorphs, the long-necked herbivores that will one day become the towering icons of prehistory. But in the early Jurassic, they're still relatively small, creatures like Ankylosaurus and Plateosaurus, walking on 2 legs or shifting toward 4, testing the benefits of height and mass. To grow big is not just to be impressive, it is to become resilient. Larger herbivores can access higher foliage, store more energy, deter predators. Their size is a strategy, one written not in ambition but in biology. A neck extended to reach a higher branch is a kind of soft revolution. But the gait and the question was a purr than caving. It's not just the plant eaters who are changing. Carnivorous dinosaurs also begin to diversify. The early theropods of the Triassic, like Coelophysis, evolve into a broader caste of agile, sharp-toothed hunters. Dinosaurs like Dilophosaurus, with its twin crests and slender frame, begin to rise. These predators are built for speed and surprise, with lightweight bones and long tails to keep them balanced as they run. Still, the Jurassic is not yet the age of monsters. Not yet. It is the age of transformation. The world is quieter than the Cretaceous chaos to come. Volcanoes rumble in the distance. Rivers meander through fern-covered valleys. The forests are dense, humid and fragrant with ancient pollen. Insects buzz softly. Dragonflies still skim the water. The air is thick with mist, and through this softness the dinosaurs grow, not just in size but in possibility. The Earth, having reset the board once more, offers its blank spaces to new players, and the dinosaurs begin to fill them, not by force but by presence. They are no longer fringe creatures in a reptilian world. They are the architects of their age. We will hear the thundering footsteps of herds moving across floodplains and the hiss of predators watching from the shade. But tonight we linger here, at the beginning, before the titans, plumbing, before the drama. Just as the sun rises over a Jurassic grove and something long-necked and gentle turns its head toward the sky. Let's step gently into the shadow of a giant. The morning mist clings low to the ground as the sun lifts its golden arc over a Jurassic valley. Trees sway softly, tall ancient conifers, and from between their trunks emerges something vast. Its neck stretches upward like a slow-moving beam of sunlight, swaying gently from side to side as it grazes the treetops. Its body is immense, heavy as a building but carried on legs like pillars. It does not charge, it does not roar, it simply walks, each footfall a deep hush in the earth. You are watching a sauropod. Brighton includes some of the most iconic dinosaurs ever to exist: Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, and the towering Brachiosaurus, whose high-arched neck and forward-leaning stance made it one of the most vertical of all. Their design was as elegant as it was extreme. Ambiguous, to grow this large, to stretch a neck over 30 feet long, to carry a body that weighed over 50 tons, requires more than just strength. It demands architectural brilliance. Their bones were hollow and reinforced, much like modern cranes. Their vertebrae were linked with air sacs to lighten the load and cool the body. Their legs stood directly beneath them like the columns of a Greek temple, not sprawling but upright, efficient. And then there's the neck. Why the neck? Why evolve such an improbably long bridge between head and heart? Undermined, quite simply, an energy-saving device. Instead of walking to the food came to them, via a neck that could sweep across broad swaths of forest canopy without the need to move the entire body. Think of it like a conveyor belt made of muscle and vertebrae. Fiberglass, some paleontologists once believed they used their necks like giraffes, rearing up to browse at high levels. Others argued they swept their heads low, vacuuming ferns like garden hoses. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Different species, different strategies. What unites them is the grace of their form, the gentle arc of a creature designed not for battle but for balance. Their size, sauropods weren't clumsy. Tracks preserved in soft mud show them walking in herds, with juveniles in the center and adults flanking the sides. Protective group behavior more familiar in elephants than in reptiles. They left behind entire trails of footprints, winding across ancient floodplains like ghost roads. Their tails, long and flexible, may have acted as whips for defense or counterweights for their great necks. They were, in every sense, ecosystem shapers. Their constant feeding pruned forests, their footsteps stirred soil, their droppings fertilized vast regions. They moved slowly, but they transformed the land. That's perhaps most humbling. Their brains were tiny. A Brachiosaurus had a head the size of a horse's, and a brain smaller than a loaf of bread. Intelligence wasn't their strategy, endurance was. There's something poetic in that. Not all greatness needs cunning. Some comes simply from existing, enduring, continuing, footstep by footstep, leaf by leaf across the centuries. So tonight, we walk beside them. We listen to the rustle of their breath. We hear the slow crack of a branch as it's drawn down by gentle teeth. We watch as a young one stumbles to its feet, nudged by a parent's gentle flank. They are not here to dazzle. They are here to remind us that strength can be quiet, that life, when given time, can grow not just wide, but tall. Now let's walk slowly through the underbrush, where the ferns part and the light flickers through tall trees. There's a soft clatter, a branch snapping beneath a heavy step. Something broad and low moves across the clearing, its tail gently swinging, its gait deliberate. A creature unlike the towering sauropods or the darting theropods. Smaller yet no less striking. It carries a row of tall leaf-shaped plates along its back like a sail of stone. Its tail ends in 4 long spikes, glinting in the sun. It is not built to run, it is not built to chase, but it is unforgettable. Of all the dinosaurs we remember from childhood books and plastic toys, Stegosaurus is among the most recognizable. Not because of size, it was large but not a giant. And not because of its brain, famously small, no larger than a walnut. What makes Stegosaurus iconic is its silhouette, the plates, the spikes, that strange, lumbering dignity. But what were those plates for? That sparked decades of paleontological curiosity, and no small amount of gentle argument. At first glance, you might assume they were armour, protection from predators. But the plates weren't solid bone. They were thin, full of blood vessels, and likely covered with skin, more display than defence. Some scientists have suggested they helped with thermoregulation, acting like radiators to release excess heat. The idea goes like this. Blood would flow into the plates, where the large surface area and thin skin would allow heat to dissipate. Others suggest the reverse. They may have soaked up sunlight to warm the animal during chilly mornings. But not everyone agrees. There's another theory, quieter, more elegant. The plates were for display. Not unlike a peacock's feathers, the plates may have been used to signal, to attract mates, to deter rivals, or to communicate in some way we no longer understand. Some paleontologists even believe that the plates could flush with colour as blood rushed through them, blushing, in a sense, during a moment of stress or show. And then there's the tail. Affectionately nicknamed the thagomizer, a term coined in a cartoon and later adopted by scientists with a wink, it featured 4 long, sharp spikes, likely used for defence. Fossil evidence shows that the spikes weren't just ornaments. Some have been found with trauma marks, suggesting they were used in life, possibly to fend off predators like Allosaurus. Buckley its small brain, Stegosaurus was far from helpless. It was part of a larger group of dinosaurs, the stegosaurs, that roamed much of the Jurassic world. Their relatives had different plate arrangements, different tail weapons, different sizes. Some had rows of spikes instead of plates. Some were flatter, some more domed. Each a gentle variation on a strangely elegant theme. There's something comforting about that kind of variety, that evolution isn't always about finding the one best solution, but about trying different answers to the same question. How do you eat in safety? How do you stay warm? How do you speak without words? Trolley wasn't the fastest, or the smartest, but it endured. It wandered forested floodplains, browsed on ferns and cycads, and raised its plates toward the sun. Soft clearing of the Jurassic mindscape, we pause with it. We don't need a final answer to the plate debate. Sometimes the mystery is part of the comfort, knowing that even among giants and predators, there was room for the strange, the slow, and the silent. Now the forest quiet changes just slightly. The rustle of leaves becomes more cautious. Footsteps soften. Herbivores pause mid-chew and turn their heads toward the wind. Something is watching. In the shadows beneath the ginkgo trees, a predator moves, not rushing, but gliding, one step at a time. Its long tail counterbalances each shift in weight. Its jaws are heavy, its eyes forward-facing. It is not the largest hunter the world will ever see, but here in the Jurassic, it is apex. Meet Allosaurus. Before Velociraptor, there was Allosaurus, a theropod dinosaur that roamed the late Jurassic over 150 million years ago. Measuring up to 30 feet long, it was the top predator in many ecosystems, stalking the same floodplains that sauropods grazed. It hunted, or scavenged, with teeth designed to slice through flesh like serrated blades, and claws that could tear or grasp. But it wasn't the first. To trace the rise of Allosaurus, we must walk back to the early Jurassic, to one of the first carnivorous dinosaurs ever described, Megalosaurus. You might recognize the name from history books. It was the first dinosaur ever scientifically named, in 1824, long before the word dinosaur even existed. At the time, it was imagined as a gigantic lizard, slow and scaly, dragging its belly along the ground. A far cry from the swift biped we now understand it to be. Still, Megalosaurus set the stage. It belonged to a lineage of theropods, two-legged, meat-eating dinosaurs that would come to dominate nearly every terrestrial environment for the next 140 million years. Theropods came in many shapes, some bulky and muscular, others slender and nimble, but most shared the same core traits: hollow bones, sharp claws, and forward-facing eyes. That last detail is key. Predators with depth perception, vision designed not just to see, but to track. Allosaurus, in particular, had a skull structured for strength and flexibility. Unlike T-Rex, whose jaws were built for crushing, Allosaurus had a more refined approach. Some paleontologists suggest it may have attacked using a hatchet strike, slashing downward with its upper jaw to open wounds rather than snap bones. It wasn't brute force, it was methodical violence. And yet these creatures weren't mindless killers. Fossil evidence shows injuries that healed, broken ribs, bitten tails, even skull fractures, suggesting Allosaurus lived long enough to recover from serious trauma. That implies not only toughness, but perhaps sociality. Some scientists believe they may have hunted in groups, or at least tolerated one another at kill sites, like wolves, or perhaps like vultures. Don't fully know, behaviour doesn't fossilize. But bones remember where muscles pulled. Teeth preserve their wear patterns. Skeletons record the lives they held. Theropods like Allosaurus were not evolutionary accidents. They were experiments in efficiency. Every tooth, curve, every claw, every hollow bone was a solution to a puzzle. How to survive in a world full of giants. They were fast enough to chase, but strong enough to kill. Their children hatched from eggs, their bones grew quickly, their presence left a ripple in every ecosystem they entered. Tonight we walk behind one, not too close, just near enough to watch it vanish into the mist. Its roar is not needed, its silence is more telling. When it's that giants the paptive in their season, in a litry in their own. Here's at len 200 increased you and tribted when they sullens tante, they enden their owned. The transformed in their use of his own and they get spirit country. It is own cofly and the case of insight, not closely being an aging, it was adaptation. Adaptation compelled. And adaptation is rarely loud. As the Jurassic fades and the Cretaceous rises, the world begins to look a little more familiar, but only just. The continents continue their slow drift apart. Sea levels rise and flood low-lying lands. Forests bloom with flowering plants, delicate blossoms that weren't yet possible in the conifer-choked jungles of the past. And the dinosaurs, they adapt. Again. Predatory species appear, strange, armoured, beaked, and sometimes even beautiful. These are not the old sauropods or the familiar allosaur types. These are the new faces of the Mesozoic, the Cretaceous caste. Let's begin with a face everyone knows, Triceratops. It lived at the very end of the Cretaceous, just before the Great Extinction. Picture a massive four-legged herbivore with three sharp facial horns and a large bony frill extending from the back of its skull. It's not just distinctive, it's theatrical. And yet, Triceratops wasn't alone. It belonged to a whole family of ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs with parrot-like beaks and decorative frills. Some had short horns, others, like Styracosaurus, wore entire candelabras of spikes around their heads. The frills may have served many roles: defense, species recognition, even courtship displays. Next, we look down, toward the ground, toward the armoured tanks of the Cretaceous, the ankylosaurs. These low-slung, heavily plated dinosaurs were built like living fortresses. Their backs were covered in bony scutes. Some even had tail clubs solid enough to break bones, like swinging a mace. Ankylosaurus, the largest of the group, could grow to over 20 feet long, and its defensive adaptations were so effective that predators may have avoided it altogether. In a world of claws and teeth, it was a walking contradiction, a passive creature wrapped in aggression. And then there were the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs. Often underappreciated, they were among the most successful and diverse groups of plant-eaters to ever live. Don't let the nickname fool you, these weren't waddling pushovers. Hadrosaurs were fast, social, and complex. Many species had elaborate crests on their heads, hollow structures connected to the nasal passages. These may have acted like trumpets, allowing the animals to call to one another across open plains. Some hadrosaurs likely lived in herds numbering in the hundreds. Fossilized nesting grounds suggest they cared for their young. Some may have migrated with the seasons. And their jaws, were marvels of engineering, equipped with hundreds of teeth in layered rows that continually replaced themselves. They could grind tough plants with precision few other dinosaurs could match. Jurassic was the age of towering grandeur. The Cretaceous was the age of sophisticated specialization. Here, even by tales muns tals to raves spikles wade, and the unstuns concerning sources from Consector and Dopteral Reserlius. The Cretaceous was the age of that nature, having mastered the basics, began to play, to shape not just survivors but statements. Dinosaurs became louder, brighter, more social. Some became armories, some became orchestras. And still, beneath all the spectacle, they were animals, living, breathing, growing, raising young. Every frill and spike was grown, slowly, from cartilage to bone. Every crest carried blood vessels. Every tail left prints in soft mud, long since fossilized into stillness. So tonight, we wander through a Cretaceous meadow. We pass a herd of grazing hadrosaurs, their crests rising and falling like waves. We watch a young ankylosaur bash a stone in idle practice. We hear the deep nasal call of a triceratops echoing between trees. The Jurassic gave us height, pledged the Cretaceous gave us variety, and together they gave us a world like no other. Now we take a turn toward the sharp-eyed, the fast-footed, the ones that hunted not with sheer power, but with speed, precision, and strategy. Say the word raptor, and you might picture the ones from the movies. Clever, scaly, snarling beasts clicking claws against cold concrete. But the truth, as so often happens, is stranger and softer, because real raptors had feathers. Skeleton. Let's begin with Velociraptor, the name everyone knows. The real animal was much smaller than its Hollywood counterpart, about the size of a large turkey. It lived in what is now Mongolia during the late Cretaceous. Its claws were sharp, its teeth were curved. But what made it truly remarkable wasn't just its weaponry, it was its agility and its plumage. Postponals from desert deposits preserve not just bones but quill knobs, the bumps where feathers once anchored to the forearm. We don't have to guess, the evidence is literal. Velociraptors didn't just share a distant lineage with birds, they wore their ancestry like a coat. Schizophrene built for flight, though. Their feathers may have been used for display, for warmth, or even for balance during high-speed chases. Picture one dashing across a sun-baked plain, tail outstretched, feathers fluttering at its sides, not for show, but for precision. And Velociraptor wasn't alone. Fruidraptor group, called Dromaeosaurs, included other feathered hunters like Deinonychus, Microraptor, and Utahraptor. Microraptor in particular was extraordinary, a four-winged dinosaur with feathers on its legs and tail as well as its arms. It may have glided between trees, a transitional step between earthbound predators and the birds that would follow. The idea of feathered dinosaurs once seemed outlandish, like dressing a crocodile in a parka. But over the last few decades, fossil after fossil has emerged from ancient lake beds and ash-covered basins in China, Mongolia and elsewhere, painting a new picture of dinosaur life. A picture full of texture, colour and complexity. Feathers weren't just a bird thing, they were a dinosaur thing. And it's now believed that feathers likely evolved before flight. Their earliest forms may have served insulation or mating displays. Only later did they become wings. Evolution, as always, works with what's available. Repurposing, refining, adapting. So what else did the movies get wrong? For one, Velociraptor was about waist-high, not human-sized. Intelligence? They were certainly smarter than many dinosaurs, but not human-smart. Their brains were likely on par with modern birds of prey, think crows or hawks. Social hunting behaviour? That's still debated. Some fossil sites suggest groupings, but whether they cooperated or merely gathered opportunistically is unclear. Those iconic sickle-shaped claws. Those were real. Raptors carried them on the second toe of each foot, held off the ground like a cat's retracted claw. They weren't for slashing wildly. They were for gripping, pinning prey down, perhaps delivering the fatal blow with a bite. Imagine a predator not charging, but leaping, hooking with its feet, balancing with its tail, and finishing with a surgical precision. Not brute force, but choreography. Remarkable of all, they never truly vanished, because birds are raptors in a way. Or rather, they're what raptors became. Strip away the drama, the flesh-tearing imagery, and you'll find a quiet thread stretching from those desert plains to your backyard. The sparrow, the hawk, the pigeon. Erp is a whisper from the Cretaceous. So tonight, if you hear wings in the dark, or a call from a rooftop wire, listen carefully. You're not just hearing a bird. Pension's a dinosaur that learned how to fly. Now, let's pause and look into the eyes of a dinosaur, not for the sharpness of the teeth or the curve of the claws, but for something quieter. A flicker, a hesitation, a sense of awareness. Were dinosaurs intelligent? It's a question that invites caution. Intelligence is a slippery concept, hard to pin down even in living animals. Is it tool use, communication, memory, play? But there are clues, and they begin inside the skull. Battlegrounds use a method called endocasting, creating a model of the space inside a dinosaur's brain case to estimate brain size and shape. From this, scientists calculate something called the encephalization quotient, or EQ, a rough comparison between an animal's brain size and what's expected for its body size. Most dinosaurs had modest EQs. Sauropods, for example, those towering long necks, had large bodies but relatively tiny brains. They were built for movement, not for planning. But some theropods, especially the smaller bird-like ones, scored much higher. Troodon, for instance, had one of the highest known EQs among dinosaurs. It had forward-facing eyes, good depth perception, and a brain-to-body ratio approaching that of modern birds. Some have called it the owl of the Cretaceous. But what did intelligence mean for them? Maybe it meant better vision, sharper reflexes, faster learning. Maybe it allowed them to navigate complex environments, remember the location of nesting sites, or even interact socially. Abandonment, some fossil evidence for that too. Cuck mass nesting grounds of hadrosaurs suggest they return to the same sites year after year. Eggs arranged in circular patterns imply care, not chaos. Some species may have guarded their young or raised them in small groups. It's not a stretch to imagine calls between parents and hatchlings, much like birds today. Patriarch behaviour is harder to confirm, but tracks preserved in mud hint at groups moving together, multiple individuals walking in parallel, turning in sync. Were they family groups, loose flocks, coordinated hunters? We may never know for sure. That we do know that brains leave more than bones behind. They leave behaviours etched into landscapes, nesting sites, migration paths, injury recoveries. A healed rib tells you more than a weapon ever could. Blackmail and intelligence isn't always about tools and fire. Sometimes it's about knowing when to hide, or when to wait, or when to run. Breastfeeding's about memory and rhythm and connection. In that sense, many dinosaurs were likely smarter than we once thought. Not philosophers, no, but not brutes either, more like foxes, or crows, or coyotes, creatures of cunning, with sharp eyes and quick feet. Unrestricted, as importantly, creatures of variation. Intelligence in dinosaurs wasn't a single spark, it was a spectrum. Some lumbered and chewed, others watched, learned, remembered. Some guarded nests, some may have even played. Phoenix. Picture a young troodon. Soft dirt. Not hunting, not feeding, just curious. Tonight we honour that kind of curiosity. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't write books or build cities, but that notices the world, that survives by paying attention. And in the flick of a tail, the tilt of a head, or the cautious glance of an eye, we see not just an animal, but something thinking, something living with awareness, however simple. Let's slow down. Not every moment in prehistory was a chase, a roar, or a thunderous stomp. Some moments were quiet, gentle, hidden in the tall grass or beneath the curve of a fern frond, moments of care. Prizing discoveries in dinosaur science over the past few decades has been the growing evidence that many dinosaurs weren't just egg layers who walked away. They were parents, tapered, present, attentive, even nurturing. It begins with the eggs. Confiscated beds around the world, scientists have found beautifully preserved nests, not just scatterings of broken shells, but carefully arranged clutches, eggs placed in circles, eggs with signs of incubation, eggs with tiny bones curled inside, paused in the moment before hatching. In some cases, the evidence is more profound. At one site in Mongolia, paleontologists discovered a small theropod dinosaur named Oviraptor, a name that originally meant egg thief, because it was found near a nest and assumed to be stealing eggs. But later analysis revealed something different. The eggs belonged to Oviraptor, and the adult was not a thief, but a parent, likely brooding over its own nest, perhaps caught in a sandstorm. Flames in time, mid-protection. It changes everything, doesn't it? Other sites show entire nurseries, areas filled with the nests of Maiasaura, a hadrosaur whose name means good mother lizard. These dinosaurs returned year after year to the same nesting grounds. Some nests contained hatchlings at different growth stages, implying they stayed in the nest for some time after hatching, rather than leaving immediately. They were fed, protected, raised. Parental care isn't just a sentimental idea, it's an evolutionary strategy. It increases the chances of offspring survival. It allows for fewer eggs but more attention. It allows for learning, for imprinting, even, perhaps, for some kind of bonding. Blurry do it, crocodiles do it. And dinosaurs? They were somewhere in between. Mothers. In some modern bird species, like rheas and emus, it's the males who incubate the eggs and care for the young. Some paleontologists suggest certain male theropods might have done the same, brooding over nests and keeping them safe. Imagine it. Safest feathered creature sitting low in the grass, head turning at every sound, the sun warming its back, the nest beneath it warm and alive with tiny heartbeats. Or a hatchling chirping weakly, nudging up through a shell, greeted not by emptiness, but by a waiting eye, a familiar scent, a soft nudge from a protective snout. Moments likely happened, millions of years ago, under alien skies and strange forests, but they happened. And in those moments, dinosaurs weren't prehistoric monsters, they were parents. Fossils don't just capture bones, they capture behaviour, they capture choices, they capture stillness. When we find a nest, a brood, or a fossil adult curled protectively around eggs, we are being shown a memory, one too deep for words, but not too deep for understanding. Tonight, let us sit beside that nest. Let us hear the breeze rustling over eggshells. Let us imagine the soft weight of a young dinosaur, warm and blinking, newly alive. Let us feel the hush of life beginning again, because in the story of dinosaurs, even the fiercest creatures paused to guard what mattered most. Let's lift gently off the forest floor now, up through the ginkgo branches into dappled shafts of sunlight. The trees sway softly beneath us, the world below a mosaic of ferns and shadows. Something flickers above, a rustle, a leap, a moment suspended in air. It doesn't quite fly, but it doesn't quite fall either. This is Archaeopteryx, the ancient feathered fossil that helped bridge a seemingly impossible gap between earth and sky, between reptile and bird. First discovered in the 1860s in the limestone of southern Germany, Archaeopteryx stunned the scientific world. Here was a creature with feathers, yes, but also teeth, a long bony tail, clawed fingers on its wings. In some ways, it was unmistakably a dinosaur. In others, unmistakably a bird. It lived during the late Jurassic around 150 million years ago, perched, quite literally, between two evolutionary branches. Did it fly? Perhaps. More likely, it glided or flapped short distances from branch to branch. Like a modern pheasant bursting upward in surprise, or a young bird testing its wings before mastering the wind. Sidelines, it wasn't alone in this in-between world. In the Cretaceous, we find Microraptor, another small, feathered dinosaur with a twist, 4 wings. Its legs, like its arms, were feathered, allowing it to glide like a living kite. Fossils show asymmetrical flight feathers, iridescent hues, and even gut contents, suggesting it ate fish, birds, and small mammals. Microraptor didn't move between them with style. And many like them tell us that feathers did not begin as flight tools. They likely started as insulation, then evolved into display structures, and only later became airfoils. Evolution, ever resourceful, simply reworked what was already there. Think of it like a coat that becomes a flag, then a sail. To sky is one of the most profound in all of evolution. Flight is rare. It's expensive, energetically speaking. It requires hollow bones, powerful chest muscles, and a coordination of movement that few creatures ever master. Yet here it was, beginning among the dinosaurs. We often think of birds as something separate, graceful, modern, delicate. But they are not an afterthought, they are a continuation. Every sparrow, every owl, every goose gliding low over a winter field is a dinosaur, still wearing the feathers that once caught the wind in the age of giants. And they're not just survivors, they are heirs. The lineage that took to the sky outlasted the thunderous titans of the land. When the extinction came, it was not the biggest or strongest that endured, it was the ones who could fly, who could hide, who could adapt. Tractation, let's look up. Let's follow the fluttering shadow of a Microraptor between ancient trees. Let's hear the thrum of wing beats that never quite cleared the canopy. Let's remember that flight didn't arrive with countless cautious flutters. And that, within every feathered wing today, lives the memory of the first one that opened to the sky. Now let's lift our gaze once more, not toward the trees or the skies, but toward the shape of the earth itself, a shape that, though slow and subtle, changed everything. The age of dinosaurs was not static. The continents, far from being fixed, were in motion. Not fast, not by any human measure, but constant. A slow, creeping rearrangement of the planet's face. Continental drift. At the dawn of the Jurassic, much of Earth's landmass was still connected, a supercontinent called Pangaea. But over millions of years, that unity began to fracture. Cracks widened. Oceans seeped in. What was once one became many. Position as the land broke apart, so did the paths of evolution. Species that once shared space found themselves on drifting islands of habitat. Populations were split. Climates shifted. Mountains rose. Currents changed. And life, ever responsive, adapted in different directions. Smuggling were gentle nudges, but powerful ones. In the south, Gondwana, which would become South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia, saw the rise of unique dinosaurs like Carnotaurus, with its strange horns and tiny arms. In the north, Laurasia birthed its own caste, Iguanodon, Deinonychus, Protoceratops. This separation allowed for divergent evolution. Creatures with a shared ancestor became very different, simply by living in different places. Much like how marsupials evolved separately in Australia, so too did dinosaurs specialize based on where they roamed. And within these continents, ecosystems became mosaics, ecological niches carved by climate, terrain, and competition. Some dinosaurs became low browsers, nibbling on ferns and shrubs. Others lifted their heads skyward to reach young conifers. Some learned to run, others to dig. Some hunted in open plains, while others stalked through dense forests. It's easy to imagine evolution as a race, but more often, it's a series of quiet adjustments. A longer toe here, a broader beak there, a shift in muscle, posture, timing. Traits passed along not because they were best in a grand sense, but because they worked. For that place, that moment, that patch of sunlight or shade. The drifting continents didn't just shape coastlines, they shaped opportunity. Reinforces as new barriers formed, dinosaurs were both isolated and challenged. Those who could adapt did. Those who couldn't left their stories in stone. And the drift reunited what had been split. Land bridges rose and fell, ocean levels danced, species mingled again after ages apart, each bringing their own evolutionary quirks. This created a kind of global symphony, themes repeating with variation, melodies weaving in and out. horned dinosaurs in the north, titanosaurs in the south, feathered hunters in the forests, armoured grazers on the plains, a rest averse, each species a note, and we, looking back from this distant shore of time, are left to piece to... So tonight, let's walk slowly across a prehistoric land bridge. Let's feel the tremble of shifting plates beneath our feet. Let's imagine the slow birth of mountains and the quiet closing of ancient seas. Because even the most monumental changes in life, mass extinctions, bird flight, the rise of tyrants, were often nudged into motion not by catastrophe, but by drift, not with a bang, constrain that steady, silent push. Let's pause and look not just at the dinosaurs themselves, but at the world they lived in, a world they didn't just inhabit, but helped shape. Because ecosystems are not made of individuals, they're made of relationships, the tangled threads of who eats whom, who shelters where, who leaves behind footprints that others follow. And during the Mesozoic, the age of dinosaurs, those threads formed a vibrant and complex web of life. Picture a Cretaceous plain, warmed by sun, thick with flowering plants. Hadrosaurs graze in loose herds, stripping leaves with battery-like jaws. Nearby, a group of ankylosaurs shuffle slowly, armoured backs glinting in the low light. In the trees, early birds flit between branches. Insects buzz. Mammals, small and soft-furred, scurry through roots and leaf litter. Above all of them, the shadow of a predator passes, Tyrannosaurus or perhaps Dromaeosaurus, head low, eyes sharp. This is not a world of disconnected species. This is a living network. Prohibited were the plants, the quiet architects of the ecosystem. In the Jurassic, these were mostly conifers, cycads, and ferns. By the Cretaceous, angiosperms or flowering plants had begun to spread. These plants offered more than just food. They provided structure. Forests, meadows, undergrowth. And they supported entire insect communities, from pollinators to decomposers. The herbivores followed. Dinosaurs like Iguanodon, Pachycephalosaurus, and the towering Camarasaurus each had their niche. Some browsed high, others low, some grazed in groups, others foraged alone. The diversity in plant eaters meant that vegetation was pruned and fertilized in countless different ways. Packing and where there are herbivores, there are predators. Some, like Allosaurus, likely targeted sauropods, biting, retreating, bleeding them down. Others, like Troodon, may have focused on eggs, nestlings, or small mammals. Even scavengers played a vital role, clearing carrion, cycling nutrients, keeping disease in check. But the food web didn't stop with teeth and leaves. Mammals, though small, were part of the system too. They likely ate insects, seeds, and even dinosaur eggs. Multituberculates, tiny, rodent-like creatures, scampered through branches and undergrowth, helping disperse seeds or preying on invertebrates. There were also amphibians and reptiles, frogs chirping near ponds, turtles basking on riverbanks, crocodiles lurking below the surface. The skies carried pterosaurs and early birds, some of which fed on fish, others on fruit or insects. And beneath it all, the soil. A living world of fungi, microbes and tiny invertebrates, breaking down waste, cycling carbon, turning leaf into life again. Dinosaurs were not separate from this, they were part of it. Ecosystem engineers, shaping their environment simply by existing. A herd of sauropods trampling through a forest didn't just feed, they opened up space for new plants to grow. A nesting didn't just raise young, they churned the earth, spread nutrients, attracted scavengers and predators. Even a single death, one carcass in the shade, could feed a dozen species for days. These weren't monsters stomping through a silent world. They were participants in a finely woven dance of energy and balance. And that balance wasn't always perfect. Ecosystems shifted, droughts came, volcanoes erupted, but still the web held. It adapted, reshaped itself, and endured for millions of years. So tonight, as we lie back and listen to the imagined sounds of that ancient world, a distant trumpet call, a rustle in the underbrush, the buzz of something small and winged, remember that the dinosaurs were not alone. They were part of something richer, something shared, not a kingdom. Filmmakers. Now the sun sets over the Mesozoic world. Colours fade from the sky, red, then violet, then dark. The air cools and a hush settles over the plains. Some dinosaurs bed down in herds shoulder to shoulder. Others retreat to the underbrush, still as stones. But not all. Yes, begin to open, wide eyes, forward-facing, adapted to low light. Because not all dinosaurs were creatures of the day. Some, it seems, may have thrived in the dark. For a long time we imagined dinosaurs as diurnal, active only in daylight. Some bathed giants in bright, ferny worlds. But recent studies are telling a softer, more varied story. One where some dinosaurs prowled under the moon, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn. How do we know? Often with eyes. The skulls of certain dinosaur fossils, scientists have studied the scleral rings, bony structures that supported the eye. These rings are still found in birds and reptiles today, and their size and shape correlate with visual sensitivity. A wider ring, proportionally, often means better low-light vision. Paleontologists analysed these rings across different dinosaur species. A pattern emerged. Some, like the small agile troodon, had rings similar to modern owls. Others, like herbivorous protoceratops, showed traits consistent with crepuscular behaviour, active at dawn and dusk. And that makes sense. Jimulbash seasons full of towering predators and midday heat, moving at the edges of daylight could be a smart strategy. Quieter, safer, cooler. More space to forage, fewer eyes watching. Imagine a small theropod, feathered and alert, slipping silently between shadows as the stars begin to prick through the sky. Its eyes catch movement. A beetle, a lizard, a low rustle. Not hunting with brute strength, but with stillness and sight. Or think of herbivores, moving slowly through moonlit fields, grazing while the world sleeps. Listening for distant footsteps, pausing at every whisper of the wind. Even large dinosaurs may have been influenced by light cycles. Some may have rested during the hottest part of the day, becoming more active when the air cooled. Herds shifting, softly, as the moon rose. Wolfgang, and let's not forget the insects, frogs, small mammals and pterosaurs, many of whom likely live by night as well. The Mesozoic night was not silent. It buzzed, clicked, echoed. There were eyes in the trees, wings in the dark. Submerged adds a beautiful depth to the dinosaur world, not just heat and chase and thunder, but cool air, soft steps, the silvery hush of survival in shadows. And perhaps it's not so different from now. Butterflies are dirds and nocturnal. So are crocodilians, even some of our own mammalian ancestors, living small and unnoticed in dinosaur times, may have survived by keeping to the dark. Night is not a lesser time, it's a different rhythm, a slower breath. Swallowing time. Fittingly, we walk that darker path. Punctuation, we follow the faint glimmer of bioluminescent insects. We hear the padded footsteps of something small and alert. We stand still as a pair of round eyes passes by, neither hostile nor afraid, just present. And we remember that the dinosaurs did not all move under the sun. Some waited for the stars. Every group has its outliers, the ones who don't quite fit the mould, the quiet eccentrics, the peculiar cousins. And in the world of dinosaurs, there were plenty of them. Not every species was a sleek predator or a plated herbivore. Some were strange, unlikely, even absurd by modern standards. But each was a reminder that evolution isn't always tidy. Sometimes it experiments. Priesthood. Let's begin with one of the most extraordinary, Spinosaurus. Longer than T-Rex, with a crocodile-shaped snout, conical teeth, and a towering sail running down its back, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus was unlike any other theropod, and it may have lived a life in water. Recent fossil discoveries, including paddle-like feet, dense limb bones, and a flattened tail, suggest that Spinosaurus was semi-aquatic, a swimmer, a fisherman. It may have stalked the banks of Cretaceous rivers like a heron, or swum through shallows like a giant reptilian otter. Fingered the idea that all large theropods hunted on land. It rewrote what a dinosaur could be. And then there's Therizinosaurus, an animal so bizarre that its claws were mistaken for turtle bones when first discovered. This feathered, pot-bellied, long-necked herbivore stood upright, with arms over 8 feet long, ending in massive, scythe-like claws. Imagine a creature that looked like a cross between a sloth and a goose, and yet belonged to the same lineage as Velociraptor. It likely used those claws not for attack, but for raking vegetation, pulling down branches, or perhaps even display. Its broad beak and small teeth suggest a diet of plants, not meat, and yet its frame still carried the echoes of its carnivorous ancestors. Bankrupt strangeness layered over strangeness. Confiscated oddballs fill out the corners of the dinosaur family tree. Amargiagosaurus, a sauropod with a double row of long spines down its neck, perhaps used for display or defense. Pkk with a dome-shaped skull that could be over 10 inches thick, possibly for headbutting rivals like living battering rams. Koinychus, a tiny desert-dwelling theropod with a single massive claw on each arm, likely for digging into insect nests. Cryolophosaurus, found in Antarctica, with a strange crest on its head and evidence that dinosaurs once lived even near the poles. Profitability species didn't just survive, they thrived in their unique environments. Their oddities were not flaws, they were solutions. Clang because evolution doesn't aim for beauty or symmetry, it aims for function. Confiscated to us may have been perfectly adapted to the challenges of its time. Flooded deltas, crowded forests, shifting seasons, insect prey, or complex courtship rituals. And perhaps that's what makes these dinosaurs so memorable. Not just their uniqueness, but their reminder that nature allows for improvisation. Prerequisited with towering predators and herding herbivores, there was still space for the unexpected. Long-clawed, the sail-backed, the single-fingered, the dome-headed. Each one a quiet defiance of the norm. So tonight, let's step off the main trail. Let's wander the edges of the forest where the strange ones live, where the shadows stretch a little longer, where the shapes are harder to name. And let's smile at the idea that life, even in the age of dinosaurs, had its weirdos. And they were wonderful. Let's take a different kind of step now. Not into facts or fossils, but into imagination. Close your eyes if you'd like. Take a breath, and let's drift gently together into a day that happened maybe 70 million years ago. The sun rises low over a broad Cretaceous plain. The air is warm already, thick with the scent of damp ferns and flowering shrubs. You're standing at the edge of a forest, its canopy broken by wide clearings and winding streams. The light is golden and soft, filtered through ancient trees. In the near distance, a herd of hadrosaurs moves slowly through a field of tall grasses. Their heads bob gently as they walk, their crests catching the sun like curved flags. One gives a soft honking call, a low, hollow sound that echoes through the still air. Another answers from deeper in the trees. Birdsong rises above the murmur. Yes, birds. Small, feathered creatures flit from branch to branch. Some are early songbirds, chirping with bright urgency. Others are stranger, more primitive, long-tailed, sharp-clawed, still not far from their dinosaur roots. Penchant near your feet, a small mammal scurries into the underbrush. Its fur is short and grey, its nose twitching rapidly. It disappears beneath a cluster of cycads, chasing something smaller still, maybe an insect, maybe a fallen seed. Windshield, something stirs in the sky. A passes, a pterosaur, wings wide as a car, glides overhead. Its wingtips flick as it rides a thermal. Its long beak opens once, then closes. You don't hear it, it's too far, but the silence it leaves behind is felt more than heard. The day warms. A young ankylosaur lumbers past, close enough for you to feel the low tremor of its footsteps. Its armour glints softly in the light, dew still clinging to its scales. It stops, snorts once, and begins chewing methodically at a thick-leaved bush. You can hear the crunch of its bite. Windshield. Stillness. Even the wind pauses. The world listens, and slowly, from behind a rise in the terrain, a large shape emerges. Not a sprint, not a charge, just a steady, deliberate movement. A Tyrannosaurus. Its head turns slowly, surveying. It doesn't roar. It doesn't need to. It walks past the hadrosaurs, who freeze for a moment, then continue on, alert but unpanicked. Perhaps this one isn't hunting. Perhaps it's full, or simply watching. Moves like a memory, powerful but quiet, and vanishes into the trees without a sound. The heat deepens. Cicadas hum. The hadrosaurs lie down to rest. Birds fluff their feathers. The light takes on that soft, drowsy tone that makes even giants seem smaller. Congressional shaded spot beneath a ginkgo tree. The trunk is cool to the touch. You lean back and listen to the breeze stirring the leaves. Above you, a few petals drift down from a flowering plant. Somewhere water trickles in a hidden stream, waiting to be answered. You are simply here, breathing the same air, feeling the same warmth, hearing the same world move. And then, like all days, this one begins to fade. Shadows stretch. The sky blushes pink, then deepens into violet. Somewhere nearby, the hadrosaurs call again, quieter now, like lullabies for each other. The stars are already beginning to gather. And the earth, as it always has, continues to turn. Before we say farewell to the age of dinosaurs, let's linger a little longer. At the top of the hill, so to speak. The view is vast from here. The Cretaceous is in full bloom. The world is thriving, and no one yet knows what's coming. This moment, these last few million years of the Cretaceous, may have been one of the most biologically rich periods in Earth's history. The continents have fully drifted apart, forming the rough outlines of the world we know today. Sea levels are high, the climate is warm, forests stretch across vast territories, pulsing with life. Dinosaurs have diversified into astonishing forms. In North America, Triceratops herds move across open fields. In South America, titanosaurs lumber through steamy jungles, their tails flicking through clouds of biting insects. In Mongolia, agile raptors dart through brush, feathers catching light like fine silk. In the skies, Quetzalcoatlus, one of the largest pterosaurs ever, soars over inland seas on wings longer than a bus. A company sing in the trees, crocodiles bask in the sun, prescribe in roots and burrows, more complex now, more varied. Phoenix have bloomed into flowers, real flowers, colourful and fragrant, calling out to newly evolved bees and butterflies. Entire ecosystems now hum with a rhythm more like our own. Seed dispersal, pollination, migration, food chains so layered and stable they could almost run forever. Stabilised to think of the dinosaur's story as a tale of decline, of slow, inevitable fading before a final curtain. But the truth is the opposite. They didn't dwindle. They thrived. Blackmail ate up until the end. They were strong, diverse and successful. The Earth wasn't emptying, it was full. The final age of the dinosaurs wasn't a whisper, submerged. It was a crescendo. Bilingual, they had filled every role nature offered. Fast hunters, towering grazers, nesting parents, night wanderers, river swimmers, desert runners, island specialists, Arctic wanderers. They had woven themselves into every corner of life. Breached and in a very real sense, they still are. Every bird that lifts off a branch or hops across a windowsill is a living thread from that world, an echo that never faded, a voice that instead of going silent, changed tune, ejected. But before that change came, before the asteroid, the dust, the darkness, there was this, a bright, full world humming with warmth and breath. Imagine walking through it. The light softens in late afternoon. A warm wind bends the tall grass. Somewhere a family of Corythosaurus huddles in the shade, while dragonflies trace looping patterns above a calm pond. The world feels eternal. Foreground. Somewhere unseen, high in the sky, a flicker of something distant, a star that moves. Quotations follow that just yet, because this is their moment. Our wasn't marked by panic or despair. It was marked by life, lived fully, without knowing how close it stood to the edge. And perhaps there's something comforting in that. That even the most magnificent stories don't always end with a fade, but with a full, brilliant final act. So tonight, let's rest here, just for a while longer, in the stillness of that glowing age, among giants and feathers and flowers. Cambridge, before the sky changed forever. It began like any other day. The herds were grazing, the forests were alive with colour, insects clicked their quiet music in the heat. Somewhere, a mother dinosaur nudged her young toward the safety of the shade. Pterosaurs floated in warm thermals above a shallow inland sea. Flowers were blooming, birds were singing, and then the sky changed. From space, the asteroid came silently, a 6-mile wide rock older than Earth itself, travelling faster than anything alive could comprehend. It didn't roar as it approached. It didn't glow with menace. He world-ended in seconds. Climbers what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula, near a town named Chicxulub. The force of the collision was equivalent to over 1 billion Hiroshima bombs, so powerful it vaporized everything for miles in every direction, punched a crater 100 miles wide and sent debris flying halfway across the planet. In that first moment, fire ruled. Forests ignited, shockwaves flattened everything nearby. The earth itself rang like a bell. Then came the fallback, molten rock and ash raining down across entire continents, setting off wildfires that raged for days. But that was only the beginning. What followed was not fire, but darkness. Particles and soot filled the atmosphere, blocking the sun. For months, if not years, sunlight barely reached the surface. Photosynthesis collapsed. Plants died. The animals that ate them starved. Then the predators starved too. Perpendicular plummeted, rain patterns changed, ocean chemistry shifted. In short bursts and long winters, the Earth became almost unrecognizable, punished. This event, known as the Cretaceous-Paleogene (KPG) extinction, wiped out around 75% of all species on Earth. Policing the great non-avian dinosaurs were among them. Freezes had survived so much, volcanoes, changing continents, rising seas, but this they could not endure. Their size, once their strength, became a burden. Their need for food, their complex ecosystems, their slow generational cycles all worked against them when the world broke. Disillusioned, not everything died. Some mammals survived, small, burrowing, warm-blooded. So did some birds, the avian descendants of the feathered dinosaurs. Crocodiles lived on, tucked into aquatic refuges. Some insects, some fish, some plants. Enough for life to begin again. But the dinosaurs, as we knew them, were gone. It didn't happen in an instant, not everywhere. Some may have lingered in isolated pockets, surviving for years or even decades in shrinking ecosystems. But in the grand shape of time, their ending was swift. A sharp line in the geological record. Can see, even today, in cliffs and stone. Disrig layer of sediment, the impact but to the quiet after. The stillness where the great footsteps faded. Because extinction isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a hush. A species unreturned, a nest unfilled, a footprint never followed. And the dinosaurs, those majestic rulers of the Mesozoic, left the stage not with regret, but with a final brilliance. They lived, they thrived, and then the sky fell. After the asteroid came darkness. Not a symbolic darkness, but a real one. A darkness so deep that the sun itself seemed to vanish. For days, then weeks and then months, light struggled to reach the surface of the Earth. What followed the impact was not a single event, but a slow unravelling. The skies filled with ash and aerosols, these fine particles, hurled into the upper atmosphere by the impact and the wildfires that followed, acted like a shield, blocking sunlight, cooling the planet. Scientists call this a nuclear winter effect, and it changed everything. Without light, plants began to die. A company in the impact zone, but everywhere. From ferns to flowering plants to the plankton that drifted near the ocean's surface, the web of life, so delicately balanced, began to tear. Herbivores, already weakened by shock and heat, now had nothing left to eat. The hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, once so abundant, vanished. Camouflage, the carnivores followed. Clang Tyrannosaurus, Dromaeosaurus, Majungasaurus, creatures that had ruled the food chain, found themselves without prey. Their towering frames and fierce strength were no match for the quiet starvation that crept across the land. Proportional, it was no different. Brigham parlancton, the microscopic plants that form the base of marine ecosystems, were hit hard. Without them, krill populations collapsed. Without krill, fish declined. Without fish, marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs disappeared. Whole layers of ocean life blinked out. And the air, it changed too. Temperatures dropped. Rain fell differently. Acid rain may have scoured forests. The chemical makeup of the oceans shifted. Oxygen levels fell in some places. In others, carbon dioxide rose. Earth entered a chaotic silence. But not everywhere. In certain corners of the world, life clung on. Small mammals, many no larger than mice, survived by burrowing, hiding and eating whatever they could. Seeds, insects, roots. Their short lifespans and rapid reproduction gave them an edge in a fast-changing world. Brushing endured too. Feathered descendants of theropods that could fly, shelter, migrate. Not all birds made it, but enough did to begin again. Unprotected, worms kept turning. Fungi began to thrive on the dead matter blanketing the ground. Nature, even at its lowest ebb, was still in motion. Maybe decades the world remained subdued. The great roar of the Cretaceous had given way to a whisper, but slowly, quietly, that whisper began to build again. Playmen returned first. Tiny, hardy species that could survive low light and thin soils. Ferns in particular made a comeback so dramatic that paleontologists sometimes call this period the fern spike. Entire landscapes were blanketed in them, a green rebirth after the grey. Insects. Before the sky fell, before the fires and the long winter, there were signs. Not sudden, not dramatic, but there. Whispered in stone, in sediment, in patterns that only become visible when you step far enough back. Because the extinction of the dinosaurs wasn't entirely unexpected. Not for the Earth, at least. A few million years of the Cretaceous, something had already begun to shift. The world was still warm, but less stable. Sea levels fluctuated. Temperatures seesawed between seasons. Inland seas that once split continents began to shrink. Forests changed. So did the air. And the animals noticed. Flames the fossil record, we begin to see a slow decline in biodiversity. Not everywhere, not all at once. But in many places, species that had thrived for millions of years began to vanish. Some lineages grew smaller, others simply stopped appearing. Hadrosaurs, once dominant, became less diverse. Some species of ceratopsians began to disappear. Even the great sauropods, though still present, were no longer the rulers of every landscape. It wasn't an apocalypse. Psychologists, it was a quiet thinning. This may have come from natural cycles. Ecosystems rise and fall over long timescales. Climate change wasn't new. But during the late Cretaceous, it began to accelerate. The causes are still debated. Shifting ocean currents, changing atmospheric gases, volcanic activity in what would become the Deccan Traps. Whatever the trigger, the result was pressure. And pressure reveals weakness. Coral reefs struggled. Insects declined in some regions. Pollinators vanished. When one species disappears, others ripple behind it. Food webs become brittle. What once bent under strain now began to crack. Some dinosaurs may have adapted, migrated, changed diets, changed ranges. Others were caught in a narrowing corridor of survival, too specialized, too slow, too tied to ecosystems already fading. And while all this happened, the continents continued to drift. North America and Asia pulled further apart. India moved toward collision with Asia. Land bridges appeared and vanished. Habitats fragmented. Populations were cut off from one another, unable to mix, to diversify, to buffer against extinction. Imagine a world that still looks alive, still full of movement and breath, but where the threads are beginning to fray, where the orchestra is still playing, but the instruments are ever so slightly out of tune. That was Earth in the late Cretaceous. And the stress wasn't just ecological, it was geological. Massive volcanic provinces were erupting in pulses, most notably the Deccan Traps in present-day India. These weren't small events. These were regions swallowing floods of lava, sustained over thousands of years. They released not just heat and ash, but gases, carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, into the atmosphere. Those gases didn't kill instantly, conquered the rules. CO2 warmed the planet, sulfur cooled it, rain became more acidic. Climate patterns grew chaotic. Some years were hotter, some colder, some wetter, some dry. Plants struggled to keep pace, so did the creatures who ate them, and slowly the stability that the dinosaurs had enjoyed for over 100 million years began to unravel. The asteroid would come, but the world was already fragile, like a house where cracks have formed behind the paint, still beautiful, still standing, but waiting perhaps for one final tremor. Tonight, we sit in that fragile moment. We breathe the warm air, watch the low light flicker through changing forests, and listen to a world still live, yet quietly preparing to change. Let's go back in time again, not to the jungles or plains of the Cretaceous, but to a place that was lava, sky and fire, to the land we now call India. Here, long before it collided with Asia to lift the Himalayas, something immense was happening. Not a single volcano, not a mountain belching fire from its peak, but a flood of lava spreading, layering, pulsing from deep within the earth. The Deccan Traps. Over the course of perhaps 1 million years, give or take, this volcanic province released enough lava to cover a region larger than modern-day France. It built up in sheets, each eruption layering over the last like a slow-motion tidal wave of stone. One flow after another, over and over, for tens of thousands of years. But it wasn't the lava that reshaped the world, it was what came with it. Gases. Enormous volumes of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide were pumped into the atmosphere with every pulse. The carbon warmed the earth, trapping heat like a thick blanket. The sulfur did the opposite, creating high-altitude particles that reflected sunlight, leading to cooling, especially after the biggest eruptions. Combination made the late Cretaceous climate unstable. In some periods, the world baked under a greenhouse effect. In others, sunlight dimmed, and ecosystems withered from lack of warmth. Disregard and it rained back to earth, mixed with water to form acid rain. It fell on forests, on rivers, on eggs in nests. Plants were burned, soils changed. Some organisms, particularly those in freshwater and marine ecosystems, would have been deeply affected. Coral reefs struggled, plankton populations faltered. While unlike an asteroid, which strikes once, fast and final, the Deccan Traps were persistent. Shrug, this was a drumbeat of change, a slow suffocation, the kind of stress that builds over generations, too subtle for a creature to notice day by day, yet too massive to ignore across the span of centuries. The timing is still debated. Extinguistionists believe the Deccan Traps began erupting before the asteroid hit, weakening ecosystems just enough to make the extinction worse. Others argue that most of the eruption came after the impact, driving home the devastation in a world already broken. And still others suggest a curious middle ground, that the impact itself may have triggered an acceleration in the volcanic activity, as if Earth, struck so violently, began to convulse from the inside. Whatever the exact sequence, the result was the same. The dinosaurs were caught in a world that was not just changing, but unravelling in multiple ways at once. Imagine living in such a world. One year the weather is scorching, the next cold and dim, trees blossom at the wrong time, streams dry up or flood, food becomes scarce, young don't survive, each generation a little more vulnerable than the last. And all the while from the south the land smokes, not as a monster but as a slow, unrelenting tide. Tonight, stand on a cooling plain of basalt, still steaming. The sky above is hazy, not from fire but from gases drifting invisibly. It isn't a world ending with drama, it's a world trying and failing to hold itself together. And in the long silence between eruptions, a distant rumble tells us that something else is still coming. When we speak of the dinosaurs' extinction, it's tempting to focus on the famous ones, the T-Rex, the Triceratops, the last great names before the curtain fell. But the truth is deeper, broader, quieter. Because the extinction that ended the Cretaceous was not just a dinosaur event. Collapse. One that erased nearly 3/4 of all species on Earth. And tonight, we walk through that vastness. Let's begin in the oceans. If you had stood on a Cretaceous shoreline and looked into the water, you would have seen richness. Ammonites spiralling in tight, patterned coils, belemnites, sleek and darting, coral reefs alive with colour and movement, massive marine reptiles like mosasaurus, powerful and precise. And then, after the extinction, silence. Ammonites, gone. Entire groups of plankton, gone. With them went the creatures that fed on them, and the ones that fed on those. It was not just large species that vanished, it was the scaffolding beneath them, the invisible architecture of life. The oceans took millions of years to recover. In the air, the pterosaurs disappeared. Some were as large as gliders, their wings spanning 20 or 30 feet. Others were small and agile, but none made it through. Whether it was their size, their life cycles, or simply bad luck, they too went quiet. Even insects, which usually weather extinction events better than most, suffered sharp losses. Fossil beds show gaps. Pollinators in particular were hit hard, likely due to the collapse of flowering plants and their interconnected systems. On land, plants struggled. The fern spike that followed was not just a sign of recovery, it was a sign of loss. Ferns are resilient. They grow where others cannot, but in many fossil layers, their overwhelming presence means only one thing: everything else had died back. Platypal reptiles beyond the dinosaurs, like some lizards and snakes, saw massive drops in diversity. Many lineages were cut short. Amphibians, though more flexible, also declined in number and kind. Whipped it was, in short, an ecological reset. Not just the top of the food chain, but the middle, the base. The entire fabric of life was torn, and what emerged afterward was not simply a reshuffling of roles. It was a new script entirely. And yet, even within this profound loss, there is a strange kind of grace. Because extinction, as brutal as it sounds, is part of the planet's rhythm. Earth has seen 5 major extinction events, and the end Cretaceous was one of them. Each time, life has faltered. Each time it has returned. Different, quietly, reluctantly at first, but always, eventually, abundantly. Minimized. The scale of this loss is worth remembering. It was not just a tragedy of giants, it was a dimming of everything: light, sound, movement, the variety of shape and form, the humming undercurrent of life in all its... For the tiny pollinators, for the fish who never saw light again, for the forests that stood quiet in the ash. Let us remember that what was lost is what made the world full, and that what remained carried the memory of what came before. Amid the silence, something moved, small, cautious, alive, because not everything perished in the extinction that closed the age of dinosaurs. While many vanished, a few lineages endured, threading their way through fire, ash and famine. They were not the giants, not the rulers. They were the survivors. Let's begin with the most familiar, mammals. For much of the Mesozoic, mammals lived in the margins. They were small, often nocturnal, tucked into burrows and tree hollows, feeding on insects, seeds and whatever else they could find. Most were no larger than rats, some even glided like flying squirrels. Others swam in shallow streams. They didn't roar, they didn't rule, but they were ready. Quick reproduction and diverse diets may have given them an edge. They didn't need much to survive. Some could live off roots, grubs or fungus. When food chains collapsed, when light disappeared and plants died back, these little mammals endured. Not by power, crowned by adaptability. The shadows of rivers and lakes, another ancient group held on, the crocodilians. Descendants of the archosaurs, cousins to the dinosaurs, crocodiles had already survived for millions of years by the end of the Cretaceous. They were ambush predators, built for patience. They could fast for months, nest in mud, wait in stillness. Aquatic, a key advantage. While land ecosystems collapsed, water offered refuge, food scraps, shelter from fire, a cooler, buffered environment. Their low metabolism, ability to breathe through partially closed nostrils, and protective nesting behaviours may have helped them outlast the catastrophe. Even today, they carry that legacy in their eyes, half-lidded, ancient, unhurried. Were the birds. Not all of them. Many bird species vanished in the mass extinction, but some made it through. They were not the large, toothed birds of the earlier Cretaceous. They were likely small-bodied, ground-dwelling, and more adaptable. perhaps feeding on seeds, insects or carrion. In a world without flowers, forests or fruit, generalists had the advantage. Bathroom birds carried with them a unique trait: flight. Flight allowed them to move between habitats, to escape fire or flood, to relocate when food became scarce, and it gave them access to niches unreachable by grounded species. Buffalo. But even more than flight, it was their biology, fast reproductive cycles, high mobility, and diverse diets that offered them a lifeline. And so they passed through. Prerequisites those survivors came the life we know now. Males would rise into the vacant roles left behind. Predators, grazers, climbers, thinkers. Birds would radiate across the sky. Songbirds, seabirds, parrots and hawks. Crocodiles would continue, mostly unchanged, patient and powerful in slow rivers. These survivors weren't just lucky. Stabilized in ways evolution had quietly shaped for eons. And in their survival, they carried forward not just their genes, but the deep memory of a world undone. So tonight we honour them. The quiet diggers, the swimmers, the watchers in the reeds, the wings that beat above a wounded earth. They were not the stars of the old world, but they were the ones who opened the door to the next. Why do some fall while others rise? It's a question as old as life. And after the great extinction that ended the dinosaurs' reign, it lingered in the soot and silence. Why did the mightiest perish, while the small and unassuming endured? Survival, it seems, isn't always about strength. More often it's about fit, not to one moment, but to many. Let's explore what might have tipped the scales. Size, for one. Smaller animals generally need less food. When resources became scarce, this gave them a critical edge. A large dinosaur required huge amounts of vegetation, or meat, to survive. A shrew-sized mammal could get by on scraps, seeds, insects hiding under bark. In a world darkened and stripped of vegetation, being little meant living longer. Dinosaurs, like modern reptiles and birds, often laid eggs and took time to raise their young. Many large species had long gaps between generations. Mammals, in contrast, reproduced quickly. They gave birth to live young, which could develop safely inside the body, shielded from the cold and the chaos above. Those who could multiply faster, adapted faster, evolved faster. Next, dietary flexibility. Specialists, those who ate only certain plants or relied on stable prey, were hit hardest. Once those food sources vanished, they had nowhere to turn. But generalists, like many surviving mammals and birds, could shift. Seeds, carrion, roots, fungi, not ideal meals perhaps, but enough to stay alive. In a world reshaped overnight, being picky was dangerous. Habitat flexibility helped too. Vested were protected from the worst. Underground the fires didn't reach, the cold came more slowly. Radiation and acid rain lost their sting in the soil. Water dwellers and semi-aquatic species found similar refuge. Crocodilians, amphibians, and even some fish rode out the storm in the quiet of lakes and rivers. Flaming. And then there was behaviour. Undermined were naturally nocturnal, already used to navigating by scent, sound and touch instead of sight. When the skies went dark, they weren't as disoriented. Others had hibernation-like cycles, slowing their metabolism in times of scarcity. Traits that once served during seasonal changes became lifelines in a global catastrophe. We must also acknowledge chance. Randomness plays a role in survival: where you were, what season it was, whether a population happened to be far from the blast zone. Evolution equips creatures with tools, but survival sometimes comes down to simple, silent luck. Still, the patterns are clear. Survivors shared traits that, taken together, painted a portrait of resilience. Flexible diets, adaptable behaviours. Weren't the flashiest, they weren't the biggest, they didn't dominate the headlines of their time, but they endured. They endured, and through them, the story of life continued. We reflect not on glory, but on persistence, on the quiet advantages, the ability to adapt, to yield, to hide when needed, to change when the world demands it. There's a lesson in that, because survival, in the end, belongs not just to the strong, but to the responsive. The Great Extinction left a quiet world. Burnt forests, empty skies, rivers flowing through barren valleys. The earth, once filled with thunderous footsteps and the flutter of wings, now seemed to hold its breath. The earth's is never the end. It's the space where something new begins. In the immediate aftermath, life was sparse, but not absent. Here and there, among ash and bone, small plants began to sprout. They weren't the towering cycads or the richly leaved angiosperms of the late Cretaceous. They were ferns, simple, ancient, resilient. Floating ferns don't need much, just moisture, space, and time. They spread rapidly, reclaiming soil scorched by fire, blanketing hillsides in waves of soft green. This rebound is so dramatic in the fossil record that paleontologists call it the fern spike. It was nature's first act of healing, a green breath after the grey. In Quanto then came the insects, beetles, ants, flies, some clinging to survival, others newly emerging. They pollinated, decomposed, and carried seeds. Their return stitched together the broken threads of the land. And slowly, the plants diversified. Grasses, previously minor players, began to spread. They would one day cover vast continents. Forests returned, different this time, shaped by a new climate, new chemistry, and new inhabitants. And those new inhabitants were mammals. Freed from the towering shadows of dinosaurs, mammals rose into the open light. No longer confined to nighttime scurrying or tree-bound secrecy, they began to explore new diets, new shapes, new behaviours. Some returned to the water, evolving into whales. Protector took to the trees and glided between branches. Probation eventually would walk upright on open plains, their hands free, their gaze lifted. Relinquished, but that was far off. First, there was rebuilding. The ecosystems didn't recover overnight. It took millions of years, perhaps 10 or more, for biodiversity to return to pre-extinction levels. The world passed through phases: fern-dominated, then early mammal forests, then mixed canopies of flowering plants buzzing with life. Bolshevik too radiated. Those that survived evolved rapidly, branching into forms we now know: waterbirds, songbirds, raptors, their bones light, but their legacy deep. Even reptiles had their second acts. Lizards and snakes diversified, crocodilians quietly persisted, turtles, unchanged in some ways since before the dinosaurs, glided on into the new age. And what began as loss became creation. This is the rhythm of the planet: a great pause, a long inhale, then the slow exhale of succession, one life paving the way for the next. Scientifically, imagine extinction as a door slamming shut, but it is also a clearing, a space that allows light to touch places it hadn't before, a reset, unasked for, but not unused. Plunge life as it always had. Hear the trill of a bird that would have been unrecognizable just a few million years earlier. Watch a small mammal hop from branch to branch, unaware that it carries in its blood a future still being written. This is not just a story of endings, it is a story of resilience, of life rising again and again from silence. There's a kind of hush in the layers of stone. If you know how to read them, rocks can whisper stories of ancient forests, of floods, of footprints left in soft mud, of creatures who lived and walked and vanished. But at the line between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, between the age of dinosaurs and what followed, there is a different kind of mark, a stillness. Not a crack or a crater, not a dramatic scar, but a thin, almost unremarkable layer, no thicker than a fingernail. Sometimes dark, sometimes pale, but always the same, no matter where you find it in the world. Iridium. An element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. Its presence is a fingerprint of the impact, evidence of that day the sky fell. But the story doesn't end with the dust. Just above that line, in the fossil record, there is a pause. Not just fewer bones, not just different species, but for a time, especially in some places, almost nothing at all. A flatness, a gap. Paleontologists call this a dead zone, It's not that life vanished completely. Some plants survived, some animals too. But in the places where fossils once bloomed in abundance, there is silence, a lull in complexity, fewer shapes, fewer sounds. It's as if the earth itself took a breath, held it, and waited. These quiet layers stretch over thousands of years. They tell of a time when ecosystems were sparse, when food webs were skeletal. Forests had not yet returned in full. The air was different, the oceans were different. In some places you can find only burrows, tiny tunnels in ancient soil, evidence of insects or mammals clinging to the edge, surviving, not thriving, climbed. And yet, within this stillness, you can begin to see change. Above the iridium layer, above the blankness, the rocks begin to shift again. Bits of pollen, fragments of fern leaves, the slow reappearance of diversity, a new cast of fossils. Manslaughter, at first, tentative, but alive. It's a reminder that even silence is part of the story. Minimized is not a sudden switch. It's a long dusk, a world cooling, dimming, resetting. And the fossil record preserves that mood, the feeling of something missing, of a chapter ending, and the next page still blank. Sometimes when we think of evolution, we imagine it as a ladder, always climbing, always improving. But the truth is gentler, more uneven. It stumbles, it waits, it regrows from stumps and seeds. The boundary between the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic is not just geological, it's emotional, a memory layered in stone. Tonight, let's sit in that quiet, demolish the hush between two ages. Flooring, not mournful. The dinosaurs are gone. The towering sauropods, the horned and frilled, the sleek and feathered hunters. Their time has passed, their footsteps no longer shake the earth. But they are not forgotten, because they left echoes, in stone, in sky, in life. Start with the stone. Physicians are not just bones, they are records. They tell us about anatomy, yes, but also about movement, behaviour, even emotions. A mother crouched over her nest. A pack travelling together. A creature mid-step, caught forever in volcanic ash. Each fossil is a moment, stilled, not erased, and through them we've rebuilt a world. Bombed how these creatures grew, how they hunted, what they ate, how they cared for their young. We found their skin impressions, their feathers, even their last meals. Some bones show signs of healing, of injury, of old age. They weren't just monsters, they were individuals. But the legacy doesn't stop with what we dig up. It's in the air too. Every bird you see is a living dinosaur, not metaphorically, literally. Descended from the theropods, evolved through time, but still carrying the same bones, the same structure, the same ancient rhythm in their hearts. The next time you hear a sparrow chirping on a fence post, or a pigeon fluttering through a city square, remember, it's a creature whose ancestors once walked beneath the shadow of T-Rex. Calypse, they are not remnants. The legacy is also in the stories we tell. From children's books to museum halls, from movies to scientific journals, dinosaurs have captured our imaginations like few things ever have. Why? Perhaps because they're just far enough removed to be safe, yet close enough to feel real. They walked on Earth. They breathed, they ate, they parented, and then they vanished. They make us wonder, what is temporary and what is timeless? Fostering us that the ground beneath our feet is not permanent, that what seems eternal, climates, continents, kings, can change, has changed, will change. But more than anything, dinosaurs teach us about resilience, because their story isn't just about an end, it's about recovery, about adaptation, about new life forming in old footprints. We see their influence in the shape of bird wings, in the curve of beaks, in the glint of a scaled eye. But we also feel it in the way we study, question, imagine, in the way we look backward to understand how to move forward. And maybe that's the real gift. Bribe's long-gone creatures still whisper in our dreams, still teach us, still walk with us in ways we don't always notice. Night as you rest, picture a distant jungle, green and alive with echoes. A bird calls. Somewhere deep in time something stirs. Not lost, not forgotten, just changed. Let's begin with something quiet. A creature lies still, its last breath already gone. Perhaps it was a hadrosaur, laid down by age beside a muddy riverbank, or a small raptor, curled in the dust of a drying floodplain. Death in nature is common, but fossilization, that is exceptional. Because most things vanish. Scavengers come first, insects, time, weather. The body breaks down, bones crack, scatter, return to the soil. But once in a great while, a different story unfolds. The body by chance is quickly buried by mud, sand, volcanic ash, shielded from the air, from decay, from teeth and claws and feet. There in the silence a transformation begins. Water seeps through the sediment, carrying minerals like silica, calcite and iron. These minerals creep into the bones, filling pores, replacing the organic material cell by cell. The original matter fades, but its shape remains. The bone becomes stone. This process, called permineralization, can take thousands, even millions of years. It's slow, steady, patient. The earth writing in stone what it once held in flesh. Sometimes there's more than bones. A footprint left in soft earth hardens and fills. The imprint of a leaf is pressed into shale like a memory pressed into clay. The ridges of skin, the twist of a feather, the curve of a nest. Each can be preserved given the right timing, pressure and chance. And then, one day, long after mountains have risen and rivers have shifted, someone finds it. A fragment sticking out of a cliff face, a shape in the stone. Not loud, not complete, but enough. A whisper from deep time. Not every fossil is dramatic. Not every find reshapes science. But each one is a bridge, a connection between this fleeting human moment and a world that lived and moved millions of years ago. Some fossils are impressions, flat outlines of shells, leaves or scales. Others are casts, where the original material decayed, but left a mould that filled with new minerals. Some are amber fossils, where tiny creatures were caught in tree resin, sealed like honeyed ghosts. Some are even fossilized droppings or coprolites, filled with clues about what dinosaurs ate. Fossils can form in deserts, swamps, riverbeds, tar pits and sea floors, but always the same principle: preservation by pause. Time must stop the usual decay. Nature must hesitate long enough for memory to take hold. It's fragile, and yet it's enough to tell a story. The earth is a quiet archivist, gently pressing moments into stone. Not all of them, just a few, enough to remember the shape of a claw, the width of a step, the quiet curl of something that once was warm, and now rests forever, in silence. If fossils are whispers from the past, then paleontologists are the ones who lean in to listen. And to do that, they need tools. Not just picks and shovels, but patience, delicacy, and a kind of reverence, because beneath every rock might be a story, a life, a moment the earth decided to keep. Let's start in the field. The work often begins in dry places, badlands, deserts, cliffs, where wind and time have already done some of the uncovering. The paleontologist walks slowly, eyes scanning the ground, not for bones exactly, but for shapes, for curves that don't belong to rocks, for the odd texture that says, "I used to live." When something promising appears, the first tools come out. Small brushes, dental picks, wooden probes, no rush, no violence. It's not like in the movies. It's slow, careful work. Dust is brushed away like crumbs from an old book. Every grain matters, every bump is a clue. As the fossil reveals itself, it's often still embedded in stone, a matrix. To remove it safely, the entire block may be wrapped in plaster and burlap, forming a protective jacket. Then it's transported to a lab, sometimes across oceans, to be fully prepared. And in the lab, the real magic begins. JFKs sit under lamps with fine tools and microscopes, teasing fossils out of stone as if waking something from sleep. Every touch is recorded, every layer is documented. Because once something is removed, it can't be undone. But not all discovery happens by hand. Plunge paleontologies embrace technology. Fossils too fragile to extract are scanned with CT imaging, the same kind used in hospitals. These scans create digital slices, letting scientists look inside skulls, bones, even fossilized eggs, without cracking them open. Lasers and synchrotron radiation can reveal chemical compositions, traces of pigments, proteins, or ancient biomolecules. We've begun to reconstruct not just shapes, but colours. The stripes on a dinosaur's tail, the shimmer on a feather, hints of life long hidden. There are even 3D printers, recreating missing bones from mirrored fragments or known patterns. These models allow researchers to study movement, weight distribution, even flight mechanics. And then there's the other kind of tool, collaboration. Stabilized paleontology is rarely a solo endeavour. It's a web of geologists, biologists, chemists, artists, historians. Each adds a layer of understanding. One finds the fossil, another analyses it, a third recreates the animal in paint or code or clay. Together they turn silence into story. But even with all this, satellites, scanners, supercomputers, there's still something beautifully humble about the work. A scientist kneeling in the dust, a fossil cradled in gloved hands, a notebook filled with sketches and questions. Bathrooms, paleontology is about listening, not just to what is said, but to what is missing, the gap where a claw once was, the dent in a skull, the silence. Between fossils, that silence, meaning. So tonight, let us picture a quiet lab, lit by a single desk lamp. A small fossil sits beneath a lens. Outside the world moves quickly, but here, time has slowed. A hand moves gently, a brush flicks dust, and the past, little by little, opens its eyes. Sometimes, a single fossil changes everything. Not because it's the biggest, or the rarest, or even the most complete, but because it arrives like a voice from a forgotten room. Clear, confident, impossible to ignore. Let's visit a few of these voices. Mound Sioux. Discovered in 1990 in South Dakota, Sioux is the most complete Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton ever found, over 90% intact. She's named after Sue Hendrickson, the fossil hunter who spotted the bones poking out from a bluff. From a distance, they looked like rust-coloured shadows. Up close, they became one of the most important discoveries in paleontology. Sue's skeleton is massive, over 40 feet long, with a skull that alone weighs more than 600 pounds. But it's not just size that makes her special. Her bones tell a story, healed injuries, arthritis, perhaps even signs of infection. She wasn't just a predator, she was a survivor. And in museums, as children stare up in awe, it's not fear they feel. It's wonder that this once was real. Now let's move to Utah and meet something different, the Utah raptor. Discovery, raptors were thought to be relatively small, clever, quick, feathered hunters. But in 1991, a fossil was found that changed the scale. Utah raptor was big, nearly the size of a polar bear, and its sickle-shaped claw, sharp, curved, deadly, was as long as a dinner plate. It brought a new sense of depth to the dromaeosaur family. These weren't just clever hunters, they were powerful, coordinated, possibly social, the stuff of myth, and perhaps the real-world origin of it. Utah raptor helped confirm something else too, the connection between raptors and birds. Its bones were hollow, its arms structured for feathers. A predator, yes, but with the heart of something that might one day sing. And then, for contrast, meet Dreadnoughtus. Discovered in Argentina and named in 2014, this titanosaur lived during the late Cretaceous and is one of the most massive land animals ever found. Its name means fears nothing, and it's easy to see why. Weighing over 60 tons, stretching more than 85 feet long, it would have towered over trees, lumbering through its environment like a living mountain. But even Dreadnoughtus is more than just a number. Its fossil includes beautifully preserved limb bones, vertebrae, and even part of the tail. Scientists have used it to understand how sauropods supported such massive frames, how they moved, how they grew, most importantly, how they didn't collapse under their own magnificence. These are just 3 stories, but behind each fossil is a human tale too, of early mornings in the desert, of dirt under fingernails, of tents flapping in high winds, of shouting when bone appears beneath a pick, of crying when it's finally lifted into the light. Fossils don't just teach us about dinosaurs, subpoena us about us. Fall back, what we value, what we preserve. They to slow down, to look closely, to feel something ancient stir beneath our feet. So tonight, let's walk through a quiet museum gallery. The lights are dim, the floor hums softly beneath you, and there, rising from the shadows, is a skeleton. Still, timeless, full of memory. It is not just a pile of bones, it is a presence. Kang, and it is waiting to speak. Most fossils are still, bones, shells, imprints, the quiet remains of once living things. But some fossils go further. They don't just tell us what a creature looked like, they tell us what it did, how it moved, how it lived, sometimes even how it felt. Crimson, remarkably, can fossilise too. Let's begin with footprints. Across ancient floodplains and sand dunes are trackways, patterns of steps pressed into soft ground, then hardened by time. Some are shallow, some deep, some straight, others winding, some made by herds, others by a lone animal walking toward water. From these tracks, paleontologists can tell more than you might think. The stride length reveals speed, the depth shows weight, a sudden swerve might suggest a startle or a chase. Side-by-side prints from juveniles and adults hint at family groups, moving together, perhaps even under protection. Crimson Famous site in Argentina shows dozens of sauropod footprints, adults and young walking in a line, the fossilised record of a journey long before words. Football. Then there are nests. Some dinosaurs, like Malsaura, whose name means good mother lizard, left behind clutch nests filled with eggs, arranged with care. Around them, juvenile bones have been found, suggesting the young didn't leave immediately after hatching. They stayed, gently, in the shadow of something large and watchful, glimpse parenting. Other nests show eggs with embryo still inside, caught mid-development, the pause button pressed by ash or mud. In Mongolia, fossils of oviraptor were found curled over eggs, not as thieves as first thought, but likely as guardians, warming or shielding their young. Prejudice the posture was preserved, forelimbs draped across the nest like wings. And sometimes, behaviour is recorded deep inside, gut contents, fossilised where they last rested. A Coelophysis fossil was found with lizard bones inside its belly, a Nothronicus with a mass of plant material. From these, we learn not only what these creatures ate, but how they hunted or grazed, whether they tore meat or sifted leaves, whether they were opportunists or specialists. Punishable too, fossilised droppings, less elegant perhaps, but rich in data. Bits of bone, scales, plant fibres, even traces of muscle. Sometimes they offer more insight than teeth. And there's one more kind of behaviour fossil, one of the most haunting. Times we find skeletons locked in motion, presumption, ator and prey entangled mid-battle. A group of dinosaurs huddled together, as if overwhelmed by ash or flood. A flock caught in flight, frozen forever. These are trace moments, where movement itself was stilled, where time reached out and said, "Stay, lobster," and so they did. Through these fossils, dinosaurs are no longer just skeletons. They become characters, individuals, living things with habits, instincts, and choices. They are no longer distant shadows. They are near, almost knowable. So tonight, let us tiptoe across an ancient riverbank, where footprints scatter in the mud. Let us crouch beside a nest, still cupping the curve of stone-shelled eggs. Let us listen, quietly, to the echoes of a life that once moved, ate, guarded, ran. These aren't just bones, they're moments, and they are still here, in stone. We don't study dinosaurs only because they're dramatic, though they certainly are. With their claws and crests, tails and teeth, they stir the imagination like little else. But they also offer something deeper. They are a lens, a living mirror held up to the grand story of life. Through their bones, their feathers, their changes across time, dinosaurs teach us about evolution, not as an abstract idea, but as something real, tangible, and beautifully complex. Start with their diversity. Presumption nor million years, dinosaurs evolved into thousands of species. Some were massive, like Argentinosaurus, stretching the length of a basketball court. Others were tiny, like Microraptor, a feathered creature the size of a crow. Some were armoured like tanks, others sleek like gazelles. Some waddled, some soared, some sprinted. This tells us that evolution isn't linear. It doesn't march toward perfection. It explores, it spreads, it tries. Natural selection, at its core, is about what works in a given moment, and dinosaurs, through their vast variety, show us that success wears many faces. Thick hides, hollow bones, beaks, horns, songs. Yes, even songs. Discharge because one of the most remarkable lessons dinosaurs offer is their connection to birds, a relationship once controversial, now widely accepted. With every discovery of a feathered fossil, with every ancient wing structure or wishbone unearthed, the link becomes clearer. Descendants of dinosaurs, communicator, they are dinosaurs. This means that traits like feathers, once thought exclusive to flight, likely evolved for other reasons first. Insulation, display, camouflage. Only later were they co-opted for soaring across the sky. This is known as exaptation, a concept in evolutionary biology where a trait developed for one purpose becomes useful for another, like feathers becoming wings, or arms becoming flippers, or jaws becoming beaks. Dinosaurs help us see these transformations in action. They offer a timeline, captured in stone, of gradual change. A claw grows longer, a hip bone shifts, a tooth disappears, one generation after another, shaped by pressures we can only begin to guess. And they remind us of something comforting. Change is natural. Speeding come and go. Ecosystems rise and fall. What survives is not always the strongest, but often the most flexible. We can also learn about the rhythms of extinction and recovery. Dinosaurs themselves evolved after the Permian extinction, the worst die-off in Earth's history. They filled niches left behind. They thrived in the aftermath. And then, eventually, they too gave way. Ebb and flow, of flourishing and fading, is not failure, flawing its life's resilience. Even traits we might not expect, like social behaviours, parenting, or intelligence, can be traced and studied in dinosaur fossils. Some nested in colonies, some may have called to one another. Some, like Troodon, had eyes. Evolution is not just about anatomy, it's about possibility. Imagine you are holding a fossil, not just a bone, but a record of adaptation, a curve in time's great winding path. Somewhere in its structure is a decision made by nature to thicken, to lengthen, to lighten, not for a reason, not with a goal, just because it worked. And from these decisions, the world was shaped, including you. Even before we had the science, we had the stories. Long before fossils were properly understood, people found strange bones in the earth, massive teeth, curved claws, skulls with crests or horns, and tried to make sense of them. And so, from these fragments, myths were born. Unleashed in cultures all around the world, may well have begun with dinosaur bones. In China, they were wise and coiling, symbols of water and sky. In Europe, they were winged and fierce, hoarders of treasure to be challenged by knights. In the Americas, serpent gods flew with feathered tails, all of them echoes of something ancient, buried, waiting to be named. And when the scientific age arrived, when we began to catalogue and classify, to draw skeletons and assign names, dinosaurs stepped from myth into memory. But they never really museums, they stand like monuments, towering skeletons posed in mid-stride, jaws frozen open, tails curled as if about to sweep across the room. Children look up with wide eyes, adults fall quiet. For a moment, time folds, and the ancient becomes immediate. These fossils don't just educate, they enchant, subjected. That's why they've leapt from stone into story. In books, they walk alongside humans. In films, they chase jeeps and roar across islands. On lunchboxes, stickers, t-shirts, they're everywhere. Jurassic Park for many was a first introduction. It didn't get everything right, but it inspired. Because dinosaurs are a bridge between fact and wonder. They are real, unearthed by scientists, measured and dated, but they are also surreal, so different from anything alive today that they feel like creatures from dreams. They awaken a childlike curiosity that never quite leaves us. They evolve, not just biologically but culturally. The T-Rex of the 1950s stood upright, dragging its tail like a kangaroo. Today's reconstructions show it balanced, sleek, bird-like. Velociraptors grew feathers. Brontosaurus was named, renamed, then welcomed back again. Even our imagining of the past changes, and that's part of the story too. Dinosaurs also ask deeper questions. About extinction, about time, about what it means to leave a trace. They remind us that Earth has been many things before us, and will be many more after. They help us see ourselves not as separate from nature, but as part of its unfolding. So whether you first met a dinosaur in a textbook or a toy box, in a museum or a movie, that connection matters. Because the fascination isn't just about claws and teeth, it's about perspective. Looking back to understand now. Before tonight, picture a bookshelf or a classroom, a theatre screen glowing in the dark, a glass case in a museum with a fossil behind it. Someone young or old leans closer, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, thoughtful. In that moment, a connection is made. Restraint is no longer far away. What does it feel like to hold time? Not a watch, not a calendar, but time itself. Compressed, silent, patient. If you've ever held a fossil in your hand, you felt it. The weight isn't heavy, but the meaning is. You're cradling a story that began millions of years ago. It might be a smooth ammonite, spiraled like a curled shell of thought, or a leaf impression, pressed so delicately into stone you think it had just fallen yesterday. Or perhaps the fragment of a bone, the rib of a hadrosaur, or the tooth of something far larger. It's cold at first, but it warms to your touch. And in that warmth something strange happens. Your own life, with all its noise and schedules and seconds ticking by, begins to feel quieter. Smaller, but not in a belittling way, in a connecting way. Like realising you're part of a much longer sentence, one that stretches across oceans and ash, feathers and fire. When you hold a fossil, you're holding deep time. Time that doesn't rush, doesn't shout. It flows slowly, like silt settling in a quiet stream, one layer after another, pressing memory into rock. And that fossil, it isn't just old. Flooring it survived everything. Flushings, ice, pressure, the shifting of continents, the changing of climates. The hands that buried it were not human. They were the hands of Earth itself. It waited for someone like you to look, to notice, to wonder. Freezes humility in that, and awe. Just show us the past. They invite us to pause, to consider what we leave behind. Not just in stone, but in behaviour, in footprints, in choices, in the way we care for the world that will one day remember us. We may never leave bones in a museum, but we leave echoes, in stories, in genes, in kindnesses passed quietly from one life to another. So tonight, as you settle in, imagine this. Quiet room, a desk, a fossil resting on a soft cloth, a hand, perhaps yours, turning it gently under a lamp. Outside, the wind moves through trees that grew from seeds dropped long after the dinosaurs fell. And somewhere in that stillness you feel it. Time. Not racing, not gone, but here, fingered in your hand. And so, the age of dinosaurs came to an end. But not entirely. Because some never left. You see them every day. Gliding between rooftops, perched on telephone wires, fluttering through branches in your neighbourhood. They chirp, they whistle, they caw. They live in cities, in forests, on coastlines. You might have fed them bread in a park, or woken to their song outside your window. Bumped. Not just their descendants, their continuation. It's easy to forget that each feathered creature is part of an unbroken thread, stretching back through fire, ash, and silence. Back to Archaeopteryx, gliding above Jurassic canopies. Back to small, ground-dwelling theropods covered in protofeathers darting between ferns. Back even further to ancestors with claws and teeth and tails longer than their bodies. When the asteroid fell, most dinosaurs vanished, but not all. Some had wings, hollow bones, beaks, high metabolisms. They were adaptable, light, quick, traits that may have helped them survive the cold, the dark, the famine. And those that made it, those few, changed. Over millions of years, they shrank, diversified, adapted. Flushing. There are over 10,000 species of birds, some no bigger than your thumb, some with wingspans wider than your arms, some that sing, some that dive, some that, if you look just right, still seem to walk with the posture of something far older. Their bones, the clues remain. A bird's wishbone, its furcula, was once the chest brace of a predator. Its three-toed foot echoes the prints fossilised in mud 100 million years ago. Invoked its feathers, now used for warmth, for flight, for display, were once a strange evolutionary experiment. Part armour, part ornament. Calibration doesn't vanish. It transforms. Proportional. You see a seagull. Think of its great-great-great-great-grandparent, the raptor with feathers and teeth. The next time you hear a sparrow call, remember that sound comes from a voice box sculpted by the same forces that gave rise to T-Rex. The dinosaurs are not just bones in a museum, chained still here, outside your window, waiting in the reeds. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful part of their story. Not that they ended with a bang, but that some of them learned how to keep going. A compan in smaller bodies, in new skies, in soft songs. Tonight, as the world quiets, and the birds tuck their heads beneath their wings, it's comforting to know that something ancient still drifts above us. That the age of dinosaurs never really ended. To came feathers. And now the journey comes to rest. We've walked alongside giants, heard the echo of thunderous steps, watched forests rise and fall, oceans shift, and the sky darken with ash. We've traced feathers back to claws, smiles back to fossils, wonder back to silence. It's strange to think how much can change in 65 million years. Stranger still to realise how much endures. Because this isn't just a story of extinction. It's a story of memory, of what the earth remembers when everything else falls away. A footprint pressed into mud that turned to stone, a bone hidden in sediment for ages waiting to be found. A single curved claw that says, I was here, I moved, I mattered. We speak of dinosaurs in past tense, but their legacy is not confined to the past. It's in our science, yes, but it's also in our dreams. In the drawings of a child sketching a long-necked creature across a page. In the quiet hush of a museum where someone stands still before a towering skeleton. Ilt of your head as a bird watches you from a fence post, small, bright-eyed, ancient. There's something deeply human about our fascination with them, perhaps because they show us the scale of time in a way we can feel. Not numbers on a chart, but lives that rose, changed, and passed on. 2, they remind us of our own place in the long unfolding. We are not the first, we will not be the last, but we are here, right now, able to listen. To hold a fossil in our palm, to walk beneath trees that once grew from the same ground where dinosaurs fed, to look up at a moon that once shone on triceratops herds and feathered raptors alike. We are brief, unthinkable, but in that brevity there is something beautiful. We can reflect, blackmail, we can learn. We can carry stories older than anything written. So, as you settle into stillness tonight, let yourself imagine one last scene. In prison. A quiet field. the stars above. And in the dirt below, the faint impression of a foot, three-toed, wide-set, paused mid-stride. No creature in sight. But the print is there. The earth has not forgotten, and neither do we. Sleep now. The dinosaurs still walk, just more softly than before.